The night was heavy with the kind of stillness that only a city on the edge of exhaustion could muster. A faint hum lingered in the air, born from the flickering neon sign above the corner store, a relic of better days, its pink and green glow sputtering like a dying heartbeat. Shadows danced across the cracked pavement below, jagged lines splitting the concrete like a map of forgotten promises. Maya Harper stepped out of her car, her sneakers scuffing softly against the ground. She was off duty, her body aching from a shift that had stretched far too long, her mind a tangle of fatigue and fleeting thoughts. The hoodie she wore soft, faded, a comfort she'd earned it hung loosely over her frame, paired with sneakers so worn they seemed to carry the weight of every step she'd taken in her career. She locked the car door with a quiet click, her eyes drifting toward the store's promise of a cold bottle of water, a fleeting taste of normalcy after hours spent navigating the chaos of the streets. But peace, it seemed, was not on the menu tonight. 20 feet away, under the harsh fluorescence of the parking lot lights, a scene unfolded that tugged at her instincts like a thread caught on a nail. 3 teenage boys barely old enough to grow stubble, their lanky frames draped in hoodies and sneakers stood rigid, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. A young officer loomed over them, his voice slicing through the quiet night like a blade. Ethan Carter. She recognized him instantly, not by his face, but by the way he carried himself, fist puffed out, shoulders squared, a posture that screamed authority he hadn't yet earned. His tone wasn't that of a peacekeeper. It was a hunter's growl, searching for prey. "Hands out of your pockets," he barked, the command sharp and unyielding. The boys flinched, their wide eyes catching the light as they obeyed, palms trembling slightly in the cool air. They weren't troublemakers, Maya thought, just kids, probably fresh off a pickup game, lingering in the glow of youthful freedom before the world demanded more of them. She told herself to keep moving. Her shift was over, her bed was calling, and this wasn't her mess to untangle. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," she muttered inwardly, her tired feet urging her toward the store. But something deeper, a quiet, insistent pull in her gut stopped her cold. She couldn't walk away, not when the air crackled with tension she knew too well. With a sigh that carried the weight of years, she turned toward the scene, her steps deliberate but unhurried. "Officer," she called out, her voice steady, calm, a lifeline tossed into choppy waters. "Everything okay here?" Carter wheeled around, his gaze raking over her like a spotlight hunting a shadow. In that moment, she wasn't Maya Harper, senior officer of the NYPD, a woman who'd clawed her way through decades of grit and sacrifice to earn her badge. In her hoodie and sweats, her dark skin catching the faint glow of the lights, she was just another civilian, another black woman daring to question his dominion. "Step back, ma'am," he snapped, his words laced with a venom that made it clear he wasn't interested in dialogue. The sharpness stung, but Maya held her ground, raising her hands slightly, palms open in a gesture of peace. "I'm just checking," she said, her tone still even, though her pulse quickened beneath her calm exterior. "Hands on the car." Now, his order hit her like a slap, so absurd she almost laughed. For a split second, she thought she'd misheard him, the exhaustion playing tricks on her ears. "Excuse me," she replied, her voice climbing with disbelief, a flicker of incredulity breaking through her restraint. She reached for her badge, the worn leather of her wallet brushing her fingertips. "I'm an officer too." Before the words could fully leave her lips, Carter lunged forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His hand clamped around her arm, twisting it behind her back with a force that sent a jolt of pain racing up her spine. The bottle of water slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the pavement with a hollow thud, forgotten as her cheek pressed against the cold, unyielding metal of his squad car. The cuffs snapped around her wrists, biting into her skin, and her shoulders screamed in protest as he tightened them with relish. "You're under arrest for obstruction," he declared, his voice thick with smug triumph, as if he'd just bagged a prize catch. Maya's breath hitched, not from the pain, but from the sheer audacity of it all around them. The teens had sprung to life, their phones yanked from pockets, cameras rolling. "Yo, she didn't do nothing, man," one shouted, his voice cracking with outrage. "This is some racist ass shit," another chimed in, his words trembling with a mix of fear and fury. Carter spun toward them, barking, "Quiet," But it was too late. The lenses were locked on, capturing every second of the unfolding nightmare. Maya clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay composed even as anger simmered beneath her skin. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice low and deliberate, each syllable a shard of ice. "If you just check my badge, save it." He cut her off, yanking her toward his car with a roughness that spoke of impatience and disdain. "You can explain yourself at the station." The ride to the precinct was a blur of surreal silence, the cage-like partition in the squad car a stark barrier between her and the man who'd stripped her of her dignity. She stared at it, her mind spinning. Her badge, her years of service, the countless nights she'd spent protecting the city known of it mattered to Carter. To him, she was just another faceless figure to subdue. When they arrived, the station buzzed with its usual late-night officers shuffling papers, radios crackling, the faint clatter of coffee mugs on desks. But the moment Carter marched her through the doors, wrists still bound, that hum died. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads swiveled, and eyes widened in a collective gasp of recognition. Desk Sergeant Victor Wells, a grizzled veteran with a voice like gravel, froze mid-rant, a pen dangling from his hand. "Maya," he stammered, his weathered face twisting into a mask of shock and dread. "What the hell is going on?" "She interfered in an active situation," Carter announced, his chest swelling with pride. A rooster strutting through the henhouse refused to comply. Victor's gaze darted between them, his brow furrowing as the pieces clicked into place. "Carter," he said slowly, his tone heavy with warning, "she's with us. She's a senior officer." For the first time that night, a flicker of doubt crossed Carter's face, his bravado faltering like a candle in a gust. "What?" he muttered, the word barely audible as his confidence deflated. Maya let out a dry, bitter laugh, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Told you," she said, her eyes locking onto his with a fierceness that made him flinch. Victor didn't hesitate. "Get those cuffs off her." Now, Carter fumbled with the key, his hands trembling as he released her. She shook her wrists free, rolling her shoulders to ease the ache, her glare never leaving him. "Congratulations, Officer Carter," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm and barely contained rage. "You just arrested one of your own." The teen's videos were already spreading like wildfire across the internet, though neither Maya nor Carter grasped the magnitude of the storm that unleashed not yet. As she strode out of the room, brushing past stunned colleagues, she caught the tail end of Carter's voice, low and urgent, speaking into his phone. "I'll handle it," he muttered, the words taut with something darker than regret. She didn't know who was on the other end, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. This wasn't just a mistake born of prejudice. There was something bigger lurking beneath the surface, and she could feel its shadow creeping closer. The next morning, Maya stood in her kitchen, the dawn light filtering through the blinds in thin, pale streaks. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the night's events replaying in her mind, like a relentless loop. A cold cup of coffee sat abandoned on the counter, its surface rippling faintly as her fingers brushed past it. Her phone lay in her hand, its screen a chaotic blur of notifications that refused to stop buzzing. She scrolled through them, her breath catching as she landed on a shaky, grainy video titled "Black Officer Arrested by Fellow Cop," uploaded by one of the teens from the parking lot. It had exploded overnight, millions of views, thousands of comments, a tidal wave of outrage crashing across every corner of the web. Carter's voice boomed through the tiny speaker, his arrogance laid bare for the world to hear, his disregard for her identity as an officer undeniable. Hashtags flared like battle cries, Rachel profiling, Officer Gainstoffer, System Mitbias. But one moment in the footage stopped her cold. Toward the end, as Carter dragged her toward his squad car, he leaned into his shoulder mic and whispered, "Don't let this derail the plan." She replayed it again and again, her stomach twisting tighter with each listen. The plan. What plan? And who was he warning? The words gnawed at her, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the narrative of a simple misunderstanding. By midday, the precinct was a pressure cooker. Maya walked through the doors, her head held high despite the weight of every stare. The air was thick with unspoken questions, conversations dying as she passed. Even those who tried to play it cool couldn't hide the tension in their shoulders. Ryan Cole, a weary officer with a quick smile and a knack for reading the room, caught up with her near the coffee machine. "Maya," he said, his voice hushed, his eyes darting around to ensure they were alone. "You've seen the video, right?" She grabbed a mug, her grip tighter than necessary. "Hard to miss," she replied, her tone clipped. Ryan hesitated, then leaned closer. "It's blowing up. The brass is pissed worried about the PR nightmare." She set the mug down with a quiet clink, her fingers curling around the handle. "The brass should be worried about more than PR." She said sharply, "Carter didn't just arrest me. He cracked open something rotten in this system." Ryan's jaw tightened, his eyes searching hers. "You think it's bigger than Carter?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "I know it is." The storm wasn't confined to the digital world. By afternoon, reporters swarmed the precinct steps, their voices a cacophony of shouted questions aimed at anyone in uniform. Maya stayed inside, refusing to feed the friends in it yet. Upstairs, in a cramped conference room, Captain James Quinn addressed a hastily assembled meeting of officers. His voice was calm but strained, a thin veneer over the chaos. "This situation has escalated," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "The video puts us in a difficult position. Carter claims it was a misunderstanding, but the optics are bad." Maya leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her patience worn threadbare. "Bad optics is an understatement, Captain," she said coolly. "He ignored my badge, ignored my words, and arrested me based on assumptions. What does that say about justice here?" Quinn shot her a look, sharp but tempered. "We're handling it, Harper. Internal Affairs is opening an inquiry." She didn't flinch. "Good. They'll find plenty to dig into." Across the room, Carter sat rigid, his face pale but his jaw set in defiance. He hadn't apologized, hadn't even glanced her way, but the restless bounce of his leg under the table betrayed his unease. As the meeting broke, he brushed past her, muttering, "This is being blown out of proportion." She turned on her heel, her voice low and cutting. "Is that what you whispered into your mic? Don't let this derail the plan." "What plan, Carter?" He froze for a heartbeat, then kept walking, his silence louder than any denial. That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table, her laptop casting a harsh glow across her face. News sites blared headlines. "NYPD officer faces backlash after arresting senior colleague." The comment sections were a war zone. Some hailed her as a hero, others sneered, accusing her of wielding the race card like a weapon. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. A text from an unknown number. "Step aside, Harper. This isn't your fight." Her pulse quickened as she stared at the words, the sender's identity masked by a string of random digits. She read it again, her mind racing. This wasn't a plea, it was a threat, heavy with intent. Whoever sent it didn't just want her to back off. They wanted her to feel the consequences of defiance. And in that moment, Maya knew this wasn't just about one night, one arrest, one corrupt cop. It was about a system built to protect its own. Even at the cost of justice, she was standing at the edge of a truth that could bring it all crashing down. Maya set her phone down on her desk, the faint hum of the precinct buzzing around her like static she couldn't tune out. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if this fight had grown beyond her pride or the badge pinned to her chest something deeper, something darker. The screen flickered to life again, cutting through her thoughts with the sharp chime of a new notification. An email this time, its subject line glaring at her in bold letters. "It's bigger than you think." Her stomach tightened, a knot of unease she couldn't quite unravel. The precinct, once a place of camaraderie and purpose, felt alien now. Conversations that used to pause out of respect when she entered a room now stuttered to a halt. For entirely different reasons, suspicion hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like a storm cloud ready to break. She caught the sidelong glances from her colleagues, their eyes carrying more than idle curiosity. There was judgment there, cold and deliberate. She'd faced tension in the force before, petty rivalries, bruised egos, but this was something else, something calculated. As she strode past a cluster of officers near the lockers, their voices dipped into a conspiratorial murmur the moment her boots hit the tile. One of them, Officer Delgado, straightened up abruptly, his broad shoulders stiffening as he flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Harper," he said, His tone clipped, forced. Maya met his gaze, her own smile sharp-edged and fleeting. "Delgado," she replied, her voice cool as she kept walking, her pace steady. She didn't need to linger to know she was the subject of their hushed exchange. Her name floated in the air behind her like a ghost she couldn't shake. In the squad room, Ryan Cole dropped a thick file onto her desk with a resounding thud that echoed through the space, pulling her attention back to the present. He stood there, hands on his hips, his usual laid-back demeanor tinged with something heavier, concern, maybe, or unease. "You look like you could use some backup," he said, his voice softer than usual. His brown eyes searching her face. Maya exhaled through her nose, flipping the file open with a flick of her wrist. "Thanks, Ryan," she muttered, her tone flat but grateful as her fingers traced the edges of the pages. It was the official transcript of her complaint to Internal Affairs, the words "under investigation" stamped across the top in stark red ink. Ryan perched on the corner of her desk, crossing his arms, his casual posture belying the tension in his jaw. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest. You know that, right?" Maya didn't look up, her focus locked on the file as she turned another page. "Good," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "Some nests need to be burned to the ground." Ryan let out a quiet chuckle, the sound warm but fleeting, his gaze drifting across the room to where Ethan Carter sat at his desk. Carter was surrounded by a small knot of officers, their laughter ringing out like nothing had changed, like the chaos of the last 48 hours was just a bad dream. "They're circling the wagons around him," Ryan murmured, his voice dropping low, conspiratorial. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers pausing on the paper. "Let them," she said sharply, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "If they're protecting him, they'll go down with him." Later that day, Maya sat alone in the precinct's cramped break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. She cradled a lukewarm cup of coffee in her hands, the bitter taste grounding her as she pored over a file detailing Carter's past assignments. Her mind churned with questions, each page revealing more gaps than answers. Footsteps approached, soft but deliberate, and she glanced up to see Officer Harris hovering near the table. He was a veteran, his weathered face etched with over 20 years of service, his graying hair cropped close to his scalp. His eyes darted around the room, nervous, before he leaned in close, his voice a rough whisper. "Be careful, Harper," he muttered, barely audible over the hum of the vending machine in the corner. Maya tilted her head, studying him, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone measured but firm. Harris straightened, his expression shuddering, guarded. "Just don't trust everyone wearing the same uniform," he said, his words clipped. Without another glance, he turned and shuffled out of the room, his heavy footsteps fading down the hall. Maya stared after him, her coffee growing colder in her hands, her mind spinning with more questions than she'd had before. Harris wasn't one for theatrics, was steady, reliable, the kind of cop who kept his head down and did the job. His warning lingered, a splinter under her skin she couldn't ignore. By mid-afternoon, the tension in the precinct had thickened into something tangible, a weight pressing down on every interaction. Whispers in the break room had morphed into sharp exchanges in the hallways. Officers who once greeted Maya with nods of respect now avoided her gaze entirely, their faces blank or openly hostile. The few who met her eyes carried silent support or defiance in their stares. As she passed Carter's desk, snippets of his conversation with Delgado drifted toward her, deliberate and loud enough to sting. "She's blowing this way out of proportion," Carter said, his voice dripping with disdain. His broad frame slouched casually in his chair. Delgado smirked, leaning against a filing cabinet. "Yeah, some people just don't know when to let things go." Maya stopped dead in her tracks, her boots squeaking against the linoleum as she turned to face them. The room seemed to shrink, the air crackling with anticipation. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice ringing out, steady and unyielding, cutting through the chatter like a gunshot. "I'm not the one who needs to let this go. The truth will come out, whether you like it or not." Silence crashed over the squad room, heavy and absolute. Carter's jaw tightened, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a flicker of something ganger, maybe fear. Delgado shifted, his smirk faltering as he glanced away, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Maya held their stares for a heartbeat longer, her pulse thumping in her ears, before turning on her heel and walking away, her head high. That evening, as the precinct emptied out, Maya lingered at her desk, packing her bag with methodical precision. Ryan approached, his footsteps light, a faint grin tugging at his lips despite the gravity in his eyes. "You really know how to make friends," he teased, though the humor didn't quite reach his voice. Maya slung her bag over her shoulder, meeting his gaze. "If they were real friends, I wouldn't have to make them," she shot back, her tone dry but edged with exhaustion. Ryan hesitated, his grin fading. "Look, I'm with you on this, but you need to watch your back. Carter's got more people in his corner than you think." "Good," Maya said, zipping her bag shut with a sharp tug. "That means I'm making them nervous." Ryan frowned, unconvinced, his brow furrowing as he opened his mouth to argue. Before he could, the captain's office door swung open with a creak, and Captain Quinn stepped into the doorway. His presence commanded the roomdel, broad-shouldered, his sharp gray eyes sweeping over the squad like a hawk. When they landed on Maya, they lingered, piercing and unreadable, before he turned and disappeared back into his office without a word. The silence he left behind felt heavier than the noise. As Maya stepped out into the night, the cold air hit her like a slap, slicing through her jacket and sinking into her bones. She shoved her hands deep into her pockets, her breath fogging in the dim glow of the parking lot lights as she made her way to her car. A prickle of unease crept up her spine, sharp and insistent, stopping her mid-stride. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the shadows. There, in the far corner of the lot, a figure stood motionless, the faint orange glow of a cigarette briefly illuminating their face before they turned and melted into the darkness. Maya's grip tightened on her keys, the metal biting into her palm as her mind raced. Not everyone wants the truth to come out, she thought, her heart thudding against her ribs. She drove away, the hum of the engine doing little to quiet the storm in her head. When her phone buzzed again, an anonymous text, "Keep digging, Harper. You won't like what you find." She didn't flinch. Threats weren't new to her. She'd faced them before from petty crooks and desperate liars. But this was different, personal, insidious, coming from within the system she'd sworn to uphold. The next morning, she showed the message to Ryan, his easy smile vanishing as he read it, his fingers tightening around the phone. "You think it's Carter?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. Maya shook her head, her lips pressing into a grim line. "No, Carter doesn't have the brains for this, but someone's pulling his strings. The question is who?" Ryan leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Whoever it is, they're serious. You've pissed off the wrong people." "Good," she said again, sliding her phone back into her pocket with a defiance that masked the unease gnawing at her. "That means I'm doing something right." By midday, she found herself in a cramped office at Internal Affairs, sitting across from Sophia Ramirez. Sophia was all sharp, edge-sharp eyes, sharper tongue, her no-nonsense demeanor filling the room as she flipped through a thick binder. "I've started digging into Carter's file," she said, her voice clipped, efficient. "His record's clean, almost to clean. But here's the kicker. He's been tied to 3 separate complaints over the past 5 years, all of them buried." Maya leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Buried how?" Sophia slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, her manicured nail tapping it once. "Settled out of court. Complainants withdrew their cases before arbitration. No reasons given." Maya's eyes scanned the page, the blacked-out names of the complainants staring back at her like voids. The pattern was undeniable, a trail of silenced voices. "You think they were threatened?" she asked, her voice low, steady. Sophia's lips thinned, her gaze hardening. "I can't prove it, but the timing, the sudden withdrawals, it's not hard to connect the dots." Maya tapped the paper with her finger, her mind racing. "And now it's happening again." Sophia nodded, her expression grim. "You're walking into dangerous territory, Harper. I've seen this play out before. They'll stop at nothing to protect their own." Maya met her gaze, a faint, determined smile tugging at her lips. "Good, because neither will I." That evening, as she drove home through the quiet streets, Her phone buzzed again, another untraceable message. Drop the case or things will get worse. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her jaw clenching until it ached. She didn't reply, forwarding the text to Sophia and Ryan instead. When she pulled into her driveway, the unease that had been simmering all day settled into her chest like a stone. She scanned the street, empty, silent, save for the faint hum of a street lamp and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to her, unshakable. Hours later, she sat in her living room, surrounded by scattered case files, the dim glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the floor. A loud crash shattered the stillness, jolting her upright, her heart slamming against her ribs. She grabbed her phone and raced to the front door, her breath catching as she saw her car in the driveway, its side window smashed, glass glittering on the pavement like fallen stars. She scanned the street, her senses on high alert, but it was deserted. Whoever had done it was gone, swallowed by the night. Her pulse thundered as she approached the car, careful to avoid the shards, her eyes catching on something in city, a piece of paper pinned beneath a jagged chunk of brick. On the driver's seat, she opened the door with trembling hands, unfolding the note as her blood turned to ice. The words, scrawled in uneven handwriting, stared back at her. Next time, it'll be you. She stepped back, her eyes darting to the shadows around her house, her training kicking in as she reached for her phone. Ryan, she said the moment he picked up, her voice steady despite the fury boiling beneath it. They just escalated. The next morning, she met Sophia at Internal Affairs, handing over the note, now sealed in a plastic evidence bag. This landed on my doorstep, she said, her tone calm, controlled. Though her hands itched to clench into fists, Sophia's expression darkened as she examined it, her sharp features tightening. They're trying to scare you, she said, her voice low, deliberate. Classic intimidation tactic. It's meant to make you back off. Maya's eyes flashed, resolute. Not happening. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her gaze narrowing as she studied Maya. They're testing you, Harper. They want to see how far you'll go. If you don't stand your ground now, they'll keep pushing until you break. Maya met her stare, unflinching. I won't break. Sophia held her gaze for a long moment before nodding, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Then we need to move fast. The longer this drags on, the more vulnerable you are. That night, as Maya boarded up her car's broken window with duct tape and cardboard, she caught a flicker of movement across the street. Under the street lamp, a figure lingered, their face obscured by shadow, their presence a silent threat. Her hand tightened on the hammer, her voice cutting through the night. Hey, she called, but they didn't respond. They stood there motionless, before turning and vanishing into the darkness. She froze, her heart pounding, the hammer heavy in her grip. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about justice, about the cost of power unchecked. Carter and his allies thought they could silence her, bury her like they had the others. But every threat, every shattered window, only sharpened her resolve. The system wasn't perfect, it was flawed, fragile, and all too often corrupt. Yet she'd sworn to protect it, to fight for it, even when it turned against her. The lesson was clear: abuse power, and the consequences would come, relentless and unforgiving. She wouldn't stop until they did. The night was heavy with stillness as Maya Harper trudged back to her car, her boots scuffing against the cracked pavement, her breath puffed out in faint clouds, illuminated briefly by the dim glow of a street lamp. She paused, resting a hand on the cold metal of her car door, and muttered under her breath, her voice a low growl of defiance. If they think this little stunt is enough to rattle me, they've got no idea who they're messing with. The words weren't just bravado, they were a shield, a way to steady the tremor of anger rippling through her. She yanked the door open and slid inside, the leather seat creaking under her weight. In the suffocating silence of the midnight hour, her phone jolted to life, buzzing insistently against the dashboard. Another message flashed across the screen, stark and ominous. This is your last warning, Harper. Stay out of it. Her eyes narrowed, fingers hovering over the device as a bitter smirk tugged at her lips. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Whoever was behind this would soon learn she wasn't the type to back down. By the time the sun clawed its way over the horizon, Maya's name had erupted across every corner of the city and beyond. A grainy video of her arrest, captured by some shaky-handed bystander, had exploded online, racking up over 1 million views in mere hours. The footage looped endlessly on morning talk shows, dissected by polished news anchors and debated by screaming panels of pundits. Social media was a wildfire of opinion. Some hailed her as a fearless renegade, a beacon of grit in a murky world, while others sneered, branding her a spotlight-chasing troublemaker. Maya sat in her apartment, the TV flickering in the background, her coffee growing cold in her grip. She felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment, pressing against her ribs like a vice. But the real spark that ignited her simmering fury came later that day, when Ethan Carter stepped into the limelight. The studio lights bathed Carter in a warm, flattering glow as he settled into a sleek leather chair, the kind that screamed authority and expense. His NYPD uniform was pristine, the creases sharp enough to cut glass, his badge gleaming like a medal of honor. He wore the expression of a man wronged by Fadi, a practiced blend of regret and resolve. That made the camera swoon. The anchor, a woman with keen eyes and a face trained to betray nothing, leaned forward slightly, her pen poised like a dagger. "Let's start with this, Officer Carter," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "You've seen the video, you've heard the accusations. What's your take?" Carter exhaled, a slow, deliberate sound meant to signal patience under pressure. "First off, I want to say I have nothing but respect for my fellow officers, Officer Harper included. But this whole thing, it's been twisted out of context." His tone was steady, almost soothing, like a teacher explaining a simple truth to a confused child. The anchor's gaze sharpened. "Twisted how, exactly?" "The footage shows you arresting a colleague without so much as a pause to confirm who she was." Carter sighed again, deeper this time, his shoulders slumping just enough to sell the weariness. "Look, it was chaotic out there. I got a call about suspicious activity, Somion lurking where they shouldn't have been. Harper wasn't in uniform, just street clothes, no badge in sight. In that moment, you don't get the luxury of second-guessing. You act, you protect, that's the job." The anchor tilted her head, unconvinced. "And you don't think your response was excessive?" Carter hesitated, a flicker of something doubt, maybe crossing his face before he shook his head. "No. I thought I was stopping something worse from unfolding. We make snap calls every day. Sometimes people don't get it, and that's tough. It's how we keep things from falling apart." In the precinct break room, Maya watched the broadcast on a battered old TV mounted to the wall. Her jaw was locked tight, her knuckles whitening around the remote. Beside her stood Ryan Cole, a burly officer with a mop of dark hair and a temper that flared quietly. His arms were crossed, his muttered words dripping with disgust. "Snap calls, huh? Funny how he had a solid 5 minutes to figure out it was you before he slapped the cuffs on." Maya didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Carter's face as he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Unfortunately, Officer Harper's choice to step in the way she did muddied the waters. I'm sure she meant well, but it turned a tense situation into a mess. Made it harder for me to do what I'm trained to do." The segment ended with Carter offering a tight, sympathetic smile to the camera, the picture of a man unfairly maligned. Maya's phone erupted in a chorus of pings, each notification a fresh stab. Most messages were from supporters, friends, colleagues, strangers who saw her as a stand against the machine. But others cut deeper. "You're the one screwing this up for everyone. Why didn't you just shut up and listen? You're the problem here, not him." She flipped the phone face down on the table, her stomach twisting into knots. Ryan killed the TV with a jab of the remote. "You good?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with worry. Maya let out a sharp breath, her eyes flashing. "He's spinning it like I'm the bad guy." Classic move, dodge the blame, point the finger. Ryan nodded, his expression darkening. "Yeah, and some idiots are swallowing it whole. But not everyone's buying his act. Not enough." Maya shot back, her voice low and fierce. That afternoon, she met with Sofia Ramirez, a weary, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for sniffing out the truth. Sofia's desk was a chaos of files and coffee-stained notes, but her mind was a steel trap. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Carter's playing the crowd like a damn fiddle," she said, flipping open a folder with a flick of her wrist. But here's where it gets juicy. A journalist reached out to me about him. Maya's curiosity flared, cutting through the fog of her frustration. A journalist? Why you? Sophia slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, her lips curling into a grim smile. They've been poking into Carter's past. Turns out this isn't his first rodeo in the headlines. 5 years back, he got a shiny commendation and a promotion after a messy case. Maya frowned, leaning closer. Sounds like a win. What's the catch? Sophia's eyes glinted with something sharp. The catch is the details. That case had an excessive force complaint tied to it, witnesses swore. Carter turned a nothing situation into a bloodbath. Someone got hurt bad. But the complaint, poof, vanished before it ever hit a courtroom. Carter walked away smelling like roses. Maya stared at the paper, her pulse quickening as the pieces clicked into place. So he's got a playbook. Screw up, cover it up, let the system polish his halo. Bingo, Sophia said, tapping the desk with a pen. He's untouchable because he knows how to game it. But if we start connecting these dots, we can rip that shield right off him. By nightfall, Maya's anger had hardened into something colder, more focused. She sat cross-legged on her living room floor. Carter's file splayed out before her like a map of deceit. Every commendation, every case, every too-clean resolution, it all screamed of a man who bent the rules and walked away grinning. Her phone buzzed again, a reporter this time. Officer Harper, any comment on Carter's interview? She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. Then typed back, not yet, but soon. The next morning, the precinct hummed with gossip. Carter's interview, the hot topic on every tongue. Maya felt the weight of sit-along glances as she strode to her desk, her chin high. Across the room, Carter lounged in a cluster of officers, his smug grin a beacon of arrogance. She didn't spare him a look. Let him bask in his little victory. Pick her moment. Late that afternoon, when the bustle had died down to a murmur, she approached his desk, her steps deliberate. Nice interview, she said, her voice cool as ice, her arms folding across her chest. Carter blinked up at her, caught off guard, but his composure snapped back fast. Just sharing my perspective, he replied, leaning back with a lazy confidence. Your perspective, Maya echoed, her tone laced with quiet venom. Funny how you skipped the part where you whispered, "Don't let this derail the plan." His face twitched, had just a split-second crack in the mask before he flashed a grin. No clue what you're talking about. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. You will. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him rigid in his chair, his smirk faltering. Outside, the evening air bit at her skin as she climbed into her car. Her phone pinged again, at a message this time, but a tip from an unknown source. Asked Carter about the Garrison file. She frowned, the words sinking into her like a stone. The drive home was a blur of city lights streaking past, the hum of her engine, a steady pulse against the silence. That tip gnawed at her, a puzzle piece she couldn't place. Who'd sent it? What did it mean? She resolved to dig into it at dawn. But as she turned onto a quieter road, a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. Headlights loomed in her rearview mirror, too close, too steady. 5 blocks they'd trailed her. A dark SUV with no plates, its presence a silent threat. Her hands tightened on the wheel, her training kicking in as she dialed Ryan. Maya? His voice crackled through, thick with concern. I've got a tail, she said, keeping her tone even. Black SUV, no plates, been on me for a while. Where are you? Ryan's voice sharpened. Crescent Avenue, southbound, 2 miles from home. Stay on, I'm near, don't stop. The SUV lunged closer, swerving with intent. Maya's heart hammered, but her focus was a blade. She jerked the wheel, dodging as it tried to force her off the road. Tires squealed, the car shuddering as she pushed it harder. Then, from a side street, Ryan's familiar roar of an engine cut through the night. His car slammed into place between her and the SUV, a shield of steel and fury. Go, he shouted through the phone. She floored it, the gas station's neon glow a beacon ahead. The SUV veered off into the shadows as Ryan held the line. She pulled in, her breath ragged. And moments later, Ryan rolled up beside her. You okay? He asked, stepping out, his face taut with worry. She nodded, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Yeah. But this just got bigger than Carter. The lesson was clear. Power could twist justice into a weapon, but the consequences of wielding it carelessly would always come knocking. The rush of adrenaline still surged through Maya Harper's veins, a wild current that refused to settle, even as the dust of the night's chaos faded into the quiet hum of the empty road. Stretching out behind them, her breaths came unevenly, each one laced with the sharp sting of realization this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ryan stood a few paces away, his gaze flicking between her battered car and the desolate asphalt they'd just escaped. The silence between them crackled with unspoken tension, the kind that follows a brush with danger too deliberate to dismiss. "That wasn't random," he said finally, his voice low and edged with certainty. "Not even close." Maya nodded, her throat tight as the weight of his words sank in. She watched as Ryan approached her car, his movements deliberate, almost predatory, like a hunter sizing up a trap. He crouched near the rear bumper, his fingers brushing over the jagged remnants of her shattered tail, light a casualty of the earlier scrape that had nearly cost her everything. Then he stopped, his body going rigid, his eyes narrowing into slits as if he'd just stumbled across something far worse than broken plastic. "What is it?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped closer, dread curling in her chest like a living thing. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached beneath the bumper, his fingers probing until they closed around something small and metallic. When he pulled it free, Maya caught the glint of it under the faint glow of a distant street lamp. A sticker, no bigger than a coin, etched with a strange symbol, a cluster of interlocking triangles that seemed to twist into one another endlessly. "You've got to be kidding me," Ryan muttered, his tone a mix of disbelief and disgust as he turned it over in his hand. Maya's pulse quickened. "What is that?" she pressed, her voice dropping lower, as if speaking too loudly might summon whatever darkness it represented. Ryan held it up between them, his expression darkening like a storm rolling in. "It's a marker," he said, his words heavy with implication. "I've seen this before. It's tied to an underground network, not cops, but enforcers, silencers, people who operate within the system, bending it to their will. They use these to tag their targets." Maya's eyes locked onto the symbol. It's cold, precise lines searing into her mind. A shiver raced down her spine, pulling into a tight, icy knot in her stomach. "Why me?" she breathed, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why come after me like this, out in the open?" Ryan shook his head, his jaw tightening as he pocketed the marker. "It's not about fear anymore, Maya. They're past subtle warnings. This is a message: back off, or face the consequences." His words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, and Maya felt the ground shift beneath her. Whoever was behind this didn't just want her scarred, they wanted her silenced. By the time she stumbled through her front door, the adrenaline had morphed into a restless, gnawing energy that refused to let her sit still. She dropped her keys onto the counter with a clatter, her hands trembling slightly as she fired up her laptop and logged into the precinct database. The familiar glow of the screen bathed her face in blue light, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, tapping out the partial plate number she'd glimpsed on the black SUV that had tailed her earlier, a fleeting detail caught in the chaos. "Come on," she muttered under her breath, her eyes fixed on the loading icon as it spun maddeningly slow. When the results finally flickered onto the screen, her stomach plummeted. Nothing, no record. The plate didn't exist, at least, not in any system she could access. She leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she tried again, cross-referencing every database she knew. Each attempt slammed into the same infuriating dead end, a blank wall of non-existence. Whoever had sent that SUV had the power to erase their tracks completely, to make evidence vanish like smoke. They weren't just outside the law, they were rewriting it from within. Her phone buzzed sharply against the counter, jolting her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was Ryan. She snatched it up, her eyes scanning the text. "That symbol isn't random. I'll dig into it. Stay safe tonight," she exhaled slowly, setting the phone down as her gaze drifted back to the empty database screen. The metallic sticker Ryan had left behind sat beside her, its interlocking triangles glinting faintly under the kitchen light, taunting her with their mystery. Who was behind this? How deep did their influence reach? The questions gnawed at her, relentless and unyielding, as she shut her laptop with a decisive snap. Sleep wasn't an option tonight. Whoever they weren't done with her yet. The precinct hummed with an eerie stillness the next morning as Maya strode through its doors, her boots echoing against the polished tile. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was the kind that buzzed with unspoken tension. A coiled spring waiting to snap. Her colleagues' conversations dwindled to hushed whispers as she passed, their eyes trailing her with a mix of curiosity and unease. She ignored them, her focus razor-sharp, her mind replaying the events of the previous night like a film stuck on loop. That SUV, the marker, the message had been a warning, a blatant attempt to intimidate her. But Maya Harper didn't bend under pressure. If anything, the attack had ignited a fire in her, a fierce determination to uncover the truth no matter the cost. They'd underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. Across the room, Ethan Carter lounged at his desk, his smug grin as infuriating as ever. He leaned back in his chair, surrounded by a handful of officers who chuckled at some half-baked joke, their laughter grating against her nerves. But when his eyes met hers, the mirth evaporated, replaced by a stiff, forced smirk that didn't reach his gaze. Maya didn't hesitate. She crossed the room with purpose, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down to confrontation. Carter's cronies scattered as she approached, melting into the background like shadows fleeing daylight, leaving him alone to face her. "Officer Harper," Carter drawled, his smile tight as he straightened slightly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Maya didn't bother with pleasantries. She leaned over his desk, her palms pressing into the wood, her voice low and cutting. "Cut the act. Carter, we need to talk." Now his discomfort flickered across his face, a crack in his cocky facade. But he masked it quickly. "Sure," he said, rising with a casual shrug that didn't quite land. "Let's go somewhere private." The interrogation room felt suffocating, its gray walls pressing in as Maya shut the door with a soft thud. Carter sat across the table, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched as if bracing for impact. "So, what's this about?" he asked, his tone dripping with feigned innocence. Maya didn't sit. She loomed over him, her eyes boring into his. "You know exactly what this is about," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. Carter shrugged, a weak attempt at nonchalance. "If this is about last night's little misunderstanding, I already told you." "Stop lying," she snapped, her words slicing through his excuses like a blade. "That SUV didn't just happen to tail me, and that marker on my car, that wasn't random." Carter's smirk faltered, a flicker of unease breaking through. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya leaned closer, her tone sharpening. "You whispered, 'Don't let this derail the plan.' Whose plan, Carter? And what's the Garrison file?" At the mention of Garrison, his face drained of color, his bravado crumbling like dry plaster. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Maya didn't flinch. "Does it matter? What matters is you're in over your head. You thought you could scare me off, but I'm coming for answers." Carter's hands balled into fists, his knuckles whitening as he struggled to hold his ground. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then spat. "This isn't my fight, okay? I'm just following orders." The admission hit her like a punch, her heart thudding against her ribs. She'd suspected he was a pawn, but hearing it confirmed shifted everything. "Whose orders?" she demanded, stepping closer. Carter's lips pressed into a thin line, the veins in his neck bulging as he fought to stay silent. "Who's pulling the strings?" "Carter," she pressed, relentless. His eyes darted to the door, a fleeting hope for rescue flashing across his face, when no one came. He broke. "Quinn," he muttered, the name slipping out like a curse. "It's Quinn's orders, not mine." Maya froze, the air rushing out of her lungs. Captain James Quinn, man who ran the precinct, who'd brushed off her concerns as petty optics issues was orchestrating this. She stepped back, her mind racing as the pieces clicked into place. "Quinn's involved?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter leaned forward, his tone a venomous hiss. "You think this is about me? About some stupid arrest? You have no idea how deep this goes." "Then enlighten me," she said, her voice cold as ice. But Carter slumped back in his chair. shaking his head. "I've already said too much." Before she could press further, the door swung open, and Ryan stepped in, his face etched with urgency. "Maya," he said, motioning her outside. Carter smirked as she turned to leave, his parting shot dripping with malice. "You want the truth. Harper, be careful what you wish for." Outside, Ryan didn't waste a second. "We've got a problem," he said. Thrusting his phone into her hands, she glanced at the screen, an encrypted message he'd intercepted, likely meant for Carter. "Control Harper before she finds Quinn's connection to Garrison." Her blood turned to ice. They weren't just aware of her digging, they were actively working to stop her. "Quinn's in this," she said, handing the phone back. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "If Quinn's pulling the strings, this goes higher than we thought." Maya's jaw tightened, resolve hardening in her chest. "Then we go higher." That night, as she left the precinct, Carter's words echoed in her mind. "You think this is about me? Wait until you see who's really in charge." Whatever awaited her at the top, it was a beast far uglier than she'd imagined, a lesson in justice twisted by power, where the consequences of overreach stained everything they touched. Weeks later, the courtroom buzzed with restless energy, a packed house of spectators and reporters cramming into every corner. The air was thick with anticipation, cameras clicking like a swarm of insects as Maya took her place at the plaintiff's table. Across from her sat Ethan Carter, flanked by his lawyer, his face a mask of rehearsed calm, the same one he'd worn on TV to spin his lies. The judge's entrance silenced the room, but the tension lingered, palpable and electric. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning, a public unmasking of corruption that demanded answers, and Maya was ready to deliver them. The prosecutor wasted no time, building the case with surgical precision. He traced Carter's actions step by step the night he'd arrested her, the damning video that captured it all. When the footage played, the room fell deathly still. Carter's voice boomed through the speakers, arrogant and commanding, barking orders as he ignored her attempts to identify herself. Then came the chilling whisper, "Don't let this derail the plan." Maya kept her face impassive, but inside, her heart raced. The video painted him not as a protector of justice, but as a man intoxicated by authority, stumbling blindly into a web he couldn't comprehend. When it ended, the silence was suffocating. The prosecutor turned to Carter, who sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Officer Carter," he began, his voice calm but piercing, "do you deny arresting a senior officer without verifying her identity?" Carter's lawyer leaped in objection, leading, but the judge waved it off with a flick of his hand. "Answer the question." Carter's jaw flexed, his eyes darting briefly to the gallery before he spoke. "I acted based on the information I had at the time." The prosecutor pounced. "And what information was that? A woman in a hoodie who dared to question you." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, a wave of doubt crashing against Carter's crumbling facade. Maya watched it unfold, her mind drifting to the bigger picture. Quinn, the marker, the erased plate. This trial was just the beginning. Justice wasn't a straight line, it was a battlefield, and the cost of power's abuse was a lesson etched in every move she made. The courtroom buzzed with a restless energy, an electric hum that seemed to vibrate through the wooden benches and seep into the very air. Carter breathed. His eyes darted toward his lawyer, a quick, jittery glance that betrayed the storm brewing inside him. The trial had already spiraled far beyond his control, and the weight of it pressed down on his shoulders like a yoke he couldn't shake. He shifted in his seat, the stiff fabric of his uniform chafing against his skin, a constant reminder of the authority he once wielded so carelessly. Now, that authority dangled by a thread, fraying with every word spoken in the room. Across the aisle, Maya Harper sat with her back straight, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. But beneath that composed exterior, her mind churned. She scanned the sea of faces in the gallery, her sharp gaze slicing through the crowd until it snagged on a figure in the back row. Captain James Quinn. He wasn't in uniform, his presence unofficial, yet he dominated the space simply by existing. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line, his eyes locked on some distant point as if he could will the proceedings into submission. To anyone else, he might have seemed detached, but Maya knew better. She'd worked under Quinn long enough to read the tension in his stillness, the calculation behind his unreadable mask. He wasn't here for Carter not to save him, at least. No. Quinn was a man who understood collateral damage, and he'd come to limit the fallout, to protect the empire he'd built brick by crooked brick. When Carter finally took the stand, the air thickened with anticipation. His lawyer, a weary man with slicked-back hair and a voice smooth as polished glass, leaned forward with a rehearsed air of confidence. "My client was thrust into a volatile situation," he declared, his words ringing out with a practiced cadence. Officer Carter acted on instinct, as any officer would in the heat of the moment. His decisions split-second choice were made to prevent chaos from erupting. This is a job that demands the impossible, and we cannot fault a man for rising to that challenge. The lawyer's hands gestured expansively, as if he could sweep away the accusations with the flourish of his fingers. Maya's lips twitched, a bitter scoff escaping under her breath. Split-second decisions. The phrase echoed in her head, laced with irony so sharp it cut. She clenched her fists beneath the table, nails digging into her palms as she fought to keep her frustration from spilling over. Those split-second decisions had landed her in handcuffs, humiliated and powerless, all because Carter couldn't be bothered to ask a single question. The prosecutor, a woman with steel in her eyes and a voice like a blade, didn't let the defense's spin linger unchallenged. She rose, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor as she approached Carter. "Officer Carter," she began, her tone measured but unrelenting. "At any point during this incident, did you request identification from Officer Harper?" The question hung in the air, heavy and pointed. Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes flickering to the side before settling back on her. "No," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, rough with the strain of the moment. "Did you check her badge?" The prosecutor pressed, stepping closer, her presence looming over him. "Her credentials, anything at all to verify who she was before you restrained her?" His face flushed a deep crimson, the color creeping up from his collar like a tide of guilt. "No," he said again, louder this time, though the word cracked at the edges. "But no further questions," she cut in, her voice a guillotine dropping. She turned on her heel and strode back to her seat, leaving Carter exposed and floundering in the wake of her precision. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker by the time the judge called for a recess. Maya slipped outside, the cool air hitting her face like a bomb after the stifling tension indoors. She inhaled deeply, letting the breeze sweep away the sweat prickling at her temples. But even out here, her mind wouldn't rest. This wasn't just about Carter's arrogance anymore. It was about the machinery that had propped him up, the system that turned a blind eye until the cracks became too wide to ignore. She glanced back through the glass doors of the courthouse, catching sight of Carter pacing near the benches. His phone was pressed to his ear, his shoulders hunched, his free hand raking through his hair in sharp, agitated strokes. His voice was a low, urgent murmur, too faint for her to catch the words. But the desperation in his tone was unmistakable. As she edged closer, drawn by a mix of curiosity and suspicion, a fragment of his conversation drifted toward her. "We need to contain this." Contain what, exactly? The trial, the damage to his career, or something darker? Something sprawling beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, a thread of unease tightening in her chest. Back inside, Carter's lawyer made a final, desperate bid to salvage his client's reputation. "Officer Carter has served this city with honor for over a decade," he proclaimed, his voice swelling with a conviction that sounded rehearsed, almost theatrical. "This case is nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding, a rush to vilify a man who was simply doing his duty." He paused, letting his words settle over the room like a plea for mercy. The prosecutor wasn't having it. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Doing his job?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the lawyer's rhetoric like a knife. "His job doesn't include arresting a fellow officer without cause, intimidating innocent civilians, or trampling over due process because it's inconvenient." Her words were a hammer, each one striking at the fragile defense Carter clung to. The judge's gavel crashed down, a sharp crack that silenced the room. "Enough," he said, his voice weary but firm. The lines on his face deepened as he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing on Carter. I've seen all I need to for a preliminary ruling. The gallery held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Officer Carter, your conduct in this matter demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and professionalism wholly unbecoming of an officer of the law. This court finds you guilty of misconduct. A ripple of sound swept through the room, gasps, whispers, the rustle of shifting bodies. Carter's head dropped, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Maya felt the weight lift slightly from her chest, a fleeting sense of vindication washing over her. But as she stepped out of the courthouse, the lightness of the air outside clashed with the heaviness still coiled inside her. She scanned the crowd instinctively, her senses sharpened by years on the force. That's when she saw him, a man lingering just beyond the steps, his face shadowed beneath a hood. He moved toward her with purpose, his steps deliberate, and when he spoke, his voice was a low hiss that sent a chill down her spine. "You're digging too deep, Harper. Watch your back." Before she could react, he slipped away, vanishing into the throng of people as if he'd never been there. Her heart pounded, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet answer. Later, in Sofia Ramirez's cramped office, the blinds were drawn tight, casting slivers of muted light across the desk cluttered with folders, printouts, and a laptop glowing faintly with case records. The air felt thick, charged with a tension that pressed against Maya's ribs. Sofia, a weary woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, pushed a stack of papers toward her. "This is where it gets messy," she said, her voice low and edged with something like dread. "These are Carter's files from the last 5 years. Take a look." Maya's fingers brushed the pages as she flipped through them, her brow creasing deeper with every line she read. The story they told was disturbingly consistent: complaints of excessive force, procedural shortcuts, violations that should have ended a career. Yet alongside each grievance sat glowing commendations, awards, promotion-shiny accolades that made no sense. "These complaints," she said, her voice tight, "they just vanish. Settled out of court, no follow-ups, no accountability." Sofia nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And that's not the half of it. Every time Carter's name popped up in a disciplinary review, there's one constant." She tapped a corner of the page, her fingernail clicking against the paper. Maya's eyes followed the gesture, landing on a name that made her stomach twist: Captain Quinn. She read aloud, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Sofia leaned back in her chair, her expression darkening. Quinn signed off on every promotion Carter ever got, blocked every investigation that came his way. But it's not just Carter. I dug into other officers under Quinn's common same pattern: dubious conduct, spotless records, and a graveyard of buried complaints. "Why?" Maya asked, though the pieces were already clicking into place, forming a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see. "That's the million-dollar question," Sofia replied, her voice heavy with implication. "But I think it's tied to that marker Ryan found on your car. This isn't just corruption, it's a network." A buzz from Maya's phone shattered the silence, pulling her attention to the screen. Her pulse spiked as she read the message: "Check your email. This might help." The email came from an anonymous sender, the subject line stark and chilling: Quinn's network. Attached was a single file marked confidential. She opened it, her eyes racing over the dense text names, dates, transactions weaving a tapestry of corruption, payments masked as bonuses, promotions traded for favors, cover-ups labeled as internal resolutions. It was a web, and Quinn sat at its center, with Carter just one of many threads. Then, before she could dig deeper, the screen glitched. Lines of text vanished, swallowed by blank spaces as the cursor blinked mockingly at the bottom. Within seconds, the file was gone. "Damn it!" Maya's hand slammed against the desk, the sting of it grounding her boiling frustration. Sofia leaned over, her brow furrowing. "What happened?" "It deleted itself," Maya said, her voice trembling with anger. "Someone didn't want me to see the whole picture." Sofia's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face tightening. If they're using encryption that's sophisticated, it's not just Quinn. Someone bigger is pulling strings, determined to salvage what she could. Maya spent hours piecing together fragments from memory and Sofia's documents. Patterns emerged sinister, deliberate patterns that hinted at something far beyond a single precinct's corruption. "This isn't just Quinn keeping his people loyal," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "This is organized, coordinated." Sophia pointed to a list of names on her screen layers: business owners, minor politicians, all linked to Quinn. "It's not just internal," she said. "They're not covering up mistakes, they're weaponizing the system to hoard power." By the time Maya left, night had fallen, the city alive with its restless hum. She checked her phone, half hoping for another tip. Instead, there was only silencious silence that felt oppressive, pregnant with unspoken threats. As she unlocked her car, a new email pinged. The subject, proof. Her heart thudded as she opened it, revealing a single line: "They've been watching you since the Garrison case. Trust no one." Attached was a document labeled Garrison Sealed. Her hand trembled as she clicked it, knowing it could unlock everything or plunge her deeper into a nightmare. The lesson was clear. Justice was a fragile thing, easily warped by those with power. And the consequences of that abuse stretched far beyond Carter's fate, threatening to ensnare anyone who dared to pull at the threads. In the dimly lit courtroom, tension hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Officer Carter sat rigid in the witness stand, his uniform crisp but his posture betraying a man under siege. His jaw clenched tight as the prosecutor, a woman with a voice like a blade slicing through the silence, bore down on him. She stood tall, her dark suit impeccable, her eyes glinting with the ferocity of someone who'd waited years for this moment. "You've testified that you were acting alone that night, Officer Carter. Is that correct?" she asked, her words sharp enough to draw blood. Carter nodded, a curt, mechanical motion, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Yes." He managed, his voice tight, almost brittle, but the prosecutor wasn't satisfied. She paced slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing like a countdown. Then, with a flourish, she unveiled her weapon, a single sheet of paper, innocuous to the untrained eye but devastating in its implications. "And yet," she continued, her tone dripping with accusation, "we have phone records showing that just before the incident, you received a call from a blocked number. 90 seconds, Officer Carter. Who were you speaking to?" The color drained from Carter's face, leaving him pale as a ghost, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic he couldn't hide. "I don't recall," he stammered, his fingers twitching against the armrest. The prosecutor's lips curled into a cold, predatory smile, the kind that promised no mercy. "Allow me to jog your memory," she said, sliding a transcript across the table with the precision of a surgeon. "This is from your department-issued radio logs. Your voice, Officer Carter, clear as day. Don't let this derail the plan." "What plan were you referring to?" Carter's lawyer, a weary man with a pinched face and a perpetual scowl, shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection. This is irrelevant and speculative," he barked, his voice tinged with desperation. The judge, a stern figure perched high above the fray, waved a dismissive hand, his gravelly voice cutting through the outburst. "Overruled. Answer the question, Officer Carter." Carter shifted in his seat, the wooden chair creaking under his weight. His gaze darted toward the back of the room, where Captain Quinn sat like a statue carved from ice. Quinn's presence was a silent thunderclap, imposing, unyielding, his sharp features betraying nothing but a chilling calm. Beads of sweat glistened on Carter's brow, trickling down his temple as he swallowed again, his Adam's apple bobbing painfully. "There wasn't a plan," he muttered, the words stumbling out like a child caught in a lie. But the prosecutor wasn't buying it. She leaned in closer, her shadow falling over him like a predator cornering its prey. "Your Honor," she said, turning to the judge with a voice that commanded attention, "we have additional evidence tying Officer Carter to Captain Quinn, a web of coordinated cover-ups and systemic corruption stretching back years." She pivoted back to Carter, her eyes boring into him. "So, Officer Carter, I'll ask you one more time. Who were you working for?" His face crumpled, a dam breaking under the weight of her relentless assault. He glanced back at Quinn again, searching for a lifeline, a nod. Anything, but Quinn offered nothing. Just that cold, unblinking stare, a void where reassurance should have been. Carter's shoulders slumped, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. He was alone, abandoned by the man he'd trusted, "It was Quinn," he blurted, his voice cracking with the strain of confession. He gave the ordersal of it. The arrests, the files, everything. It was under his direction. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, a ripple of shock that sent whispers skittering across the gallery like wildfire. Even the judge, usually an unshakable pillar of authority, blinked in surprise, his gavel hovering mid-air. Captain Quinn rose to his feet, his movements slow and deliberate, his calm facade cracking just enough to reveal the fury simmering beneath. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet menace. "This is a baseless accusation from a desperate man trying to save his own skin." The prosecutor turned her gaze on Quinn, undeterred, her resolve as unbreakable as steel. "Captain Quinn, we'll get to you soon enough. For now, Officer Carter, please continue. What exactly did Captain Quinn instruct you to do?" Carter hesitated, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the stand. But the floodgates were open now, and there was no turning back. "He told me to suppress complaints," he said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper, "to protect officers loyal to him. He said it was about maintaining control, keeping the department in line." "And the garrison file," the prosecutor pressed, her words slicing through the air like a whip. Carter flinched, his body jerking as if struck. His voice fell even lower, barely audible. "That was the first time I saw how far it went. Quinn, he used it to leverage people, to keep them in line." All eyes swung to Quinn, who stepped forward, his expression a mask of stone. "Your Honor," he began, his tone as steady as ever, "this so-called testimony is nothing but the ravings of a man dodging accountability. My record speaks for itself. I've devoted my life to this department, and I won't stand for these lies." The prosecutor didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the bench, her voice rising with conviction. "Captain Quinn, your record also shows a trail of buried complaints, unexplained promotions, and suspicious payouts to officers like Carter. Care to explain those?" Quinn smirked, leaning slightly toward the microphone, his voice dropping to a low, almost guttural growl. "Do you think taking me down will change anything? You have no idea how deep this runs." The judge's gavel crashed down, a sharp crack that silenced the murmurs swelling through the room. "Order," he bellowed. "This court will recess while we review today's evidence. Captain Quinn, Officer Carter, you will both remain in custody for further questioning." Maya Harper, seated among the spectators, let out a slow, shaky breath, her heart pounding against her ribcage. Carter's confession was a hard-won triumph, a crack in the wall of corruption she'd been hammering at for months. But Quinn's words lingered, a dark shadow creeping into her mind. How far does this go? As the courtroom emptied, the buzz of voices fading into a distant hum, Maya gathered her belongings with trembling hands. She felt a chill at her back, an instinct honed by years on the force. Turning, she found Quinn standing mere feet away, flanked by two officers who looked less like escorts and more like enforcers, their broad shoulders and grim expressions radiating threat. "This isn't over, Harper," Quinn said, his voice a low hiss meant for her ears alone. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and calculating, a predator sizing up its next move. "You've opened a door you can't close." Maya met his gaze, her spine stiffening, refusing to let him see the fear clawing at her insides. "Then I guess I'll walk through it," she shot back, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. Quinn was led away, his silhouette cutting a menacing figure against the fluorescent lights, and Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers brushing the cracked screen as a new email popped up. The subject line stared back at her, stark and ominous. "You've only scratched the surface." The fallout was seismic. By the next morning, Captain James Quinnance, a towering, untouchable figure in the NIPSAT in a holding cell, his pristine uniform replaced by a rumpled jumpsuit. Internal affairs descended like vultures, tearing back the curtain on a sprawling network of corruption that had festered for years. The city reeled as news vans clogged the streets outside the precinct, their cameras flashing like lightning. Headlines screamed across every channel. "NYPD scandal. High-ranking officers exposed in widespread cover-up." Reporters swarmed, hungry for sound bites, while officers scrambled to scrub their names from Quinn's poisonous legacy. Maya stood at the eye of the storm, Her desk at the precinct, a makeshift command center amid the chaos. Ryan Cole, her partner of 3 years, found her there, leaning against the edge of her desk, her eyes fixed on the television mounted high on the wall. A news anchor's voice droned on, listing Quinn's crimes with clinical precision: buried complaints, fabricated evidence, ties to power brokers beyond the department. The list stretched on, endless and damning. Ryan dropped a thick file onto her desk with a thud, breaking her trance. "You did it," he said, his voice warm with admiration, though his tired eyes betrayed the toll of the past few days. Maya glanced at him, her face a mask of exhaustion and resolve. "No," she said quietly, shaking her head. "Carter did it. He broke, and Quinn's arrogance finished the job." Ryan studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing as he crossed his arms. "Still, you stood your ground, Maya. None of this would have come out without you pushing." She shrugged, picking up the filer cords from the Garrison case, the spark that had ignited this inferno. Names, transactions, connections sprawled across the pages, a map of corruption far bigger than Quinn alone. "This network doesn't end with him, Ryan," she said, holding up a page marked with red ink. "Look at this, lawyers, politicians, even media figures. They've been shielding him, working with him." Ryan's frown deepened, his broad frame tensing. "You think they're still out there?" Maya's eyes darkened, her voice grim. "I don't think you know." The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of interviews, late-night meetings, and grueling hearings. The city hailed Maya as a hero, but she brushed off the praise, her focus razor-sharp on the layers of conspiracy peeling back with every step. Sofia Ramirez, a weary internal affairs investigator with a quick wit and a no-nonsense edge, showed up at Maya's apartment one evening, a stack of files clutched under her arm. "This is everything we've got on Quinn's network so far," Sofia said, dropping the pile onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. "But there are whole less things we can't pin on him directly." Maya flipped through the pages, her frustration mounting as she scanned the cryptic notes and redacted lines. "They're cleaning up after him," she muttered, her fingers tightening around a sheet. "The people he worked with, the ones who profited by recovering their tracks." Sofia nodded, her sharp eyes narrowing. "And they're watching us." That night, Maya returned home to find an unmarked envelope shoved under her door. No stamp, no address, just her name scrawled in jagged ink. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper with 3 words scratched across it. "They're watching." She froze, the note trembling in her hand, her mind racing. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, a whisper from the shadows she dared to expose. She stepped onto her porch, scanning the quiet street. A car idled at the corner, its tinted windows swallowing the light, its engine a low growl. The moment her eyes locked on it, the vehicle roared to life and peeled away into the night, leaving only exhaust and questions in its wake. Maya stood there, the note still clutched tight, the weight of it sinking into her bones. The next morning, she met Ryan and Sofia at a greasy diner far from the precinct's prying eyes. She slid the note across the chipped table, its words stark against the faded formica. "They're regrouping," she said, her voice low but firm. "Whoever is left is still out there, making moves." Sofia picked it up, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This doesn't shock me. We took out their kingpin, but the machine they built, it's still humming. They'll find someone to replace Quinn." Ryan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his voice a quiet rumble. "So what's our play?" "We keep going," Maya said, her resolve hardening like iron. "We dig deeper, expose more. They think they can scare us into backing off, but they've misjudged us." Sofia's mouth twitched into a faint, approving smile. "Good. Because internal affairs just tapped us to lead the next phase of this investigation." Maya nodded, a fire sparking in her chest. "Then let's get to work." As they left the diner, the morning sun stretched long shadows across the pavement, a stark reminder of the darkness still lurking ahead. Maya paused outside, the notes weighed a constant in her pocket, her breath steadying as she steeled herself for the fight to come. Carter's confession had been a spark, Quinn's downfall a tremor, but the true battle for justice was only beginning. Corruption's roots ran deep, fed by power and greed, and every lesson carved into this saga screamed the same truth: unchecked authority festers. and its consequences ripple far beyond the guilty. For Maya, this wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning, and she'd see it through. No matter how far the shadows stretched, the whisper slipped from her lips like a fragile secret, barely audible over the hum of the city waking up around her. "It isn't over," Maya Harper murmured to herself, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fierce determination. "It's only just beginning." She adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag on her shoulder and took a shaky step forward, her boots scuffing against the cracked pavement. The autumn wind tugged at her dark hair, pulling strands loose from the messy bun she'd tied hours earlier during a sleepless night of planning her next move. As she walked away from the towering courthouse where she'd just testified, her phone vibrated sharply in her pocket, snapping her out of her swirling thoughts. She pulled it out with a frown, her hazel eyes narrowing at the screen. No sender, no subject, just two words glowing ominously in the dim morning light. "We're waiting." Her stomach twisted, a cold knot of dread tightening as she read it again, her thumb hovering over the screen. Who was watching her now, and what did they want? Maya's journey had never been simple. It wasn't just about dragging the rot of corruption into the harsh light of day thou. She'd done plenty of that, unearthing secrets that powerful people had buried deep. No, her fight was something bigger, something that pulsed in her chest with every breath she took. It was about resilience, the kind that kept her standing when her knees wanted to buckle under the weight of it all. It was about courage, the raw, unpolished bravery that pushed her to speak when silence would have been safer. And it was about the unshakable power of refusing to bend, even when the odds towered over her like a storm cloud ready to burst. Through her struggle, she'd shown the world, or at least this small corner of it, how one person's stubborn resolve could start to pick apart a tangled web of lies and control. But the deeper truth, the one that lingered in her mind as she walked, was that real change didn't come from a single courtroom win or a headline splashed across the evening news. Justice wasn't a trophy you claimed and dusted off on a shelf. It was a relentless, bruising phyton that demanded constant attention, unshakable unity, and a willingness to keep going when every muscle screamed to stop. That was the lesson etched into her bones now, and it made her story a blazing reminder. To stay quiet was to agree with the wrong, to let it fester unchecked. She hadn't always been this way, this fierce, this unyielding. There'd been a time when looking the other way would have been the easier choice, when the threats hadn't yet started slipping under her door in the form of unsigned notes or whispered warnings from strangers on the street. But Maya had seen too much. The families cheated out of their homes by Quinn's network. The bribes slipped into the hands of officials who swore they served the public. The quiet despair of people who'd given up hoping for better. She couldn't unsee it. And once she'd started digging, once she'd pulled that first thread and watched the whole rotten system begin to unravel, there was no turning back. The threats had come: fast phone calls in the dead of night, her car tires slashed in broad daylight, the chilling isolation of friends who suddenly stopped returning her calls. Danger shadowed her every step, but her determination burned brighter than her fear. She was fighting for justice, not just for herself, but for every person who'd been crushed under the weight of that corrupt machine. Her resolve was a lighthouse in the fog, a testament to what could happen when someone dared to stand tall, not just for their own sake, but for everyone who couldn't. As the case against Quinn's network unfolded in that stuffy courtroom, with its flickering fluorescent lights and the faint smell of old coffee lingering in the air, the real enemy came into focus. It wasn't just Quinn himself, with his slick suits and smug grin, or Carter, his enforcer who loomed in the background like a storm waiting to break. The true battle was against the systems that propped them up, the greased palms, the turned backs, the laws twisted to protect the powerful instead of the powerless. Maya had faced them head-on, her voice steady even when it shook, her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she laid out evidence that couldn't be ignored. She didn't flinch, didn't back down, and that refusal sent a message louder than any speech. This fight wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been dismissed, silenced, or stepped on. And if she could keep going, so could they. Meanwhile, miles away in the sleepy town of Millbrook, the morning sun stretched long, jagged shadows across the downtown streets, painting the brick facades in hues of gold and gray. Officer James Wilson sat in his patrol car, the engine idling with a low rumble as he adjusted his police badge in the rearview mirror. At 42, with 15 years on the force, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who thought he'd seen it all. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and his jaw was set in a hard line as he sipped bitter coffee from a scratched thermos. September 15th dawned crisp and tense, the air buzzing with an unease he could feel in his bones. Social media had been ablaze for days with talk of a massive civil rights rally planned for that afternoon in Central Park, and Wilson had been tapped to keep an eye on it, along with a handful of other officers from the precinct. Another day, another protest. He grumbled under his breath, the words dripping with weary cynicism as he shifted in his seat. Millbrook had been restless lately, the demonstrations growing louder and larger with each passing month. The police department was stretched thin. Nerves frayed after ugly clashes in nearby cities had splashed across national news. Wilson didn't like the spotlight never had, but he couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. As he steered his cruiser toward the park, he caught sight of small clusters of people moving in the same direction, their faces set with purpose. Some carried rolled-up banners tucked under their arms. Others clutched handmade signs scrawled with bold demands for change. By noon, the park was a sea of bodies, hundreds of voices rising together in a rhythmic chant that echoed off the trees. At the heart of it stood Marcus Thompson, a 35-year-old community organizer whose name carried weight in Millbrook's poorest corners. With his law degree from State University and 6 years on the city council, Marcus had built a reputation as a steady, thoughtful leader. Today, he'd traded his usual suit for a simple blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows against the lingering summer heat. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he climbed onto a rickety platform hastily assembled that morning. His broad shoulders squared as he adjusted the microphone with a faint squeal of feedback. "We're here today not to tear each other apart, but to pull ourselves together," Marcus began, his voice cutting through the noise with a calm, resonant strength. "Millbrook can be more than what it is. It has to be more, and we're the ones who'll make it happen." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that rolled over the park like thunder. From his post near the entrance, Officer Wilson watched with a scowl, his fingers tightening around the thermos. He hated how every phone in the crowd seemed to be pointed his way, capturing his every move. Being filmed on the job always set his teeth on edge, made him feel like a target instead of a protector. As Marcus spoke on, weaving a vision of accountability and stronger ties between the police and the people they served, Wilson's unease grew. Then he spotted a knot of counter-protesters edging into the park, their faces twisted with defiance, their own signs raised high. The air shifted, crackling with tension as murmurs rippled through the rally. Keep it peaceful, Marcus called from the stage, raising his hands as he noticed the brewing storm. He stepped down, his long strides purposeful as he moved toward the clash, determined to calm the waters before they boiled over. Wilson moved too, his boots crunching on the gravel path, his hand drifting to his belt out of habit. The scene felt charged, electric, as Marcus planted himself between the two groups, his voice steady as he addressed them both. "This isn't why we're here," he said firmly, his eyes locking with a young counter-protester whose fists were clenched. "We can disagree and still keep this civil," but Wilson saw it differently. In his mind, Marcus wasn't helping, was meddling, stepping into police territory without invitation. Without a word, he closed the distance, his hand clamping down on Marcus's arm with a grip that brooked no argument. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace," Wilson barked, his voice loud enough to cut through the crowd's stunned gasps. He yanked Marcus's hands behind his back, snapping the handcuffs on with a roughness that hinted at something darker: satisfaction, maybe, or a need to reassert control. The crowd exploded, shouts of anger mingling with the click of dozens of phone cameras swinging into action. Marcus didn't struggle, didn't flinch, but his voice rang out clear and unwavering as he stared into a nearby lens. "I have the right to protest peacefully. I've broken no laws." Wilson's jaw tightened, his eyes glinting with a cold authority as he tightened the cuffs further, oblivious to the history he was forging in that moment. As he marched Marcus toward the patrol car, the chants grew deafening. a tide of outrage swelling behind them. People trailed after, phones still rolling, capturing the way Marcus held his head high despite the bruising grip on his arms. Back at the station, Wilson leaned over the arrest report with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. He checked the boxes disturbing the peace, interfering with police businesses, pen scratching across the paper. As the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, he didn't know that one of those videos was already racing across the internet, racking up views by the second, or that news vans were circling downtown, ready to make this their lead story. In the holding cell, Marcus sat on a hard bench, his eyes closed as he drew slow, steady breaths. This wasn't his first brush with power's ugly side. Had seen it choke his community for years, but feeling it firsthand was different. It sank into him, heavy and personal, shifting something deep in his core. This wasn't the end of his fight. It was the spark that would ignite something far bigger. And Officer Wilson, with his smug certainty and heavy hand, had no idea he'd just lit the match that would change Millbrook forever. By the next morning, the video of Marcus's arrest had blazed across social media, a wildfire of outrage and disbelief. Every news outlet in town had latched onto it. The footage replayed endlessly, Marcus stepping in to stop a fight, Wilson's unprovoked aggression, the cuffs snapping shut. Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed local reporter with a reputation for digging deep, stood outside the police station, her microphone steady as a growing crowd chanted behind her. Hundreds of citizens have gathered here to demand Marcus Thompson's release, she said into the camera, her voice cutting through the noise. Sources say this isn't the first time Officer James Wilson has been tied to questionable arrests. Inside, Police Chief Robert Martinez watched the broadcast from his cluttered office, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. He'd known Wilson for years, had brushed off past complaints as the usual friction of the job. But this was undeniable, the public's fury too loud to dismiss. "Get me Thompson's file," he snapped at his secretary, then added, "and Wilson's record too." As he pored over the papers, Marcus walked free, his lawyer Diana Rodriguez at his side, her sharp gaze daring the flashing cameras to ask the wrong question. Marcus smoothed his wrinkled shirt, standing tall despite the ache in his wrists, and faced the swarm of reporters with a quiet dignity that silenced the chaos. "What happened yesterday wasn't just about me," he said, his voice steady as steel. "It's about a pattern we can't ignore anymore. I've seen it from the city council, and now I've felt it up close. For years, we've tried playing by their rules, filing reports, sitting in meetings, begging for reform, but nothing shifts. Maybe it's time we demand new voices at the top." The crowd roared, a chant bubbling up from the edges. "Thompson for mayor! Thompson for mayor!" The words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. As Marcus's fight and Maya stretched toward a future where justice wasn't just a hope, but a reckoning for those who'd abused their power too long. In the dimly lit living room of their modest home, Wilson slumped into his worn leather armchair, his eyes locked on the flickering television screen. The news blared relentlessly, each channel replaying the same damning footage that painted him as the villain. His chest tightened with a slow-burning fury, his fingers gripping the remote so hard his knuckles whitened. Behind him, in the shadowed doorway, his wife Karen lingered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't need to say a word, her furrowed brow, and the way her lips pressed into a thin line, spoke volumes. She could feel the storm brewing inside her husband, his frustration mounting with every passing minute. "They're twisting it all," Wilson muttered through gritted teeth, jabbing the channel button again and again, only to be met with the same story, his story told in a way that made him unrecognizable even to himself. "I was just doing what I was trained to do." Across town, the air in City Hall was thick with tension. Mayor Richard Green sat at the head of a long oak table, his fingers drumming nervously against a stack of papers that spelled out his political doom. The polling numbers glared up at him, stark and unforgiving. His approval rating had plummeted overnight, a once guaranteed re-election now slipping through his grasp like sand. His staff buzzed around him, their voices overlapping in a frantic hum as they tried to strategize a way out of the mess. His campaign manager, James, leaned forward, his tie slightly askew from hours of pacing. "We've got to get ahead of this, Richard," he urged, his tone sharp with urgency. "That video's a disaster. The optics are killing us. Either we cut ties with Wilson now, or we sink with him." Green's jaw tightened, his mind racing. He'd built his career on promises of stability and order, but now, with every new clip that surfaced had grainy security footage showing Wilson's heavy-handed tactics, especially against Minarish's carefully crafted image, was unraveling. As the day wore on, the scandal grew legs of its own. More videos trickled onto the internet, each one a fresh wound exposing a pattern of aggression that couldn't be ignored. Local activists hunched over laptops in cramped living rooms, their faces illuminated by screens as they pieced together statistics that painted a grim picture. Arrest rates skewed heavily against certain communities. Incidents of force that left a bitter taste in the mouth. At the First Baptist Church, the basement hummed with the energy of a packed crowd. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as neighbors squeezed in, their whispers rising into a chorus of outrage and hope. Reverend Michael Jackson stood at the front, his voice booming with the weight of decades spent in service to his flock. He'd known Marcus Thompson since the boy was knee-high, watching him grow into a man who never shied away from a fight for justice. "This is our moment," the Reverend declared, his eyes sweeping over the sea of faces. "Marcus has always stood for what's right. Maybe this chaos, this pain is God's way of showing us who's meant to lead us forward." In a small apartment a few miles away, Marcus Thompson sat on a threadbare couch beside his sister, Angela. The walls around them were a testament to his life's work plaques for community service, glinted faintly in the lamplight, his law degree framed proudly above the desk where he'd spent countless nights studying. Angela's phone buzzed incessantly, her thumb scrolling through an avalanche of messages from across Millbrook, words of encouragement, pleas for change, voices lifting him up as their champion. "The people are ready," she said, her voice soft but resolute, her eyes meeting his with a quiet fire. "They trust you, Marcus." He rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow as he crossed to the window. Beyond the chipped paint of the sill, the city sprawled out before him, its downtown lights twinkling like stars against the dusk. He could just make out the police station in the distance, its cold brick walls a reminder of the night he'd spent locked inside, the sting of handcuffs still fresh in his memory. "If I do this," he said, his words deliberate, heavy with the weight of what lay ahead, "it can't be about settling scores. It's got to be about building something better." Angela's smile was small but fierce, her fingers already flying across her laptop as she pulled up campaign filing details. "Deadlines next week," she said. "We've got work to do." Night settled over Millbrook like a heavy blanket, but the city buzzed with restless energy. The story had broken free of its local cage, spilling onto national news networks as civil rights groups reached out to Marcus with offers of support. On social media, hashtags flared to life, trending alongside raw, unfiltered accounts from residents who'd crossed paths with Wilson and his fellow officers. What had begun as a single arrest at a rally, a moment of chaos caught on camera, had ignited a fire that no one could have foreseen. The next few weeks would test Millbrook to its core, peeling back layers of hidden truths and forcing the city to confront its flaws. A political reckoning loomed on the horizon, one that would reshape its future in ways no one dared predict. 3 weeks later, Marcus Thompson's campaign headquarters pulsed with life. The converted storefront downtown's, a hollow shell with dusty windows, was now a hive of activity. Volunteers darted between tables littered with flyers, their voices overlapping in a symphony of purpose. Angela stood at a whiteboard, marker in hand, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sketched out their plan. 3 pillars, she announced to the room, her tone steady and commanding. "Police reform, economic growth, community unity. That's what we're fighting for." Across town, Officer Wilson rolled through his usual patrol route, his squad car cutting through streets that felt increasingly hostile. The stares from residents burned into him, some curious, some accusing, and he gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw set. His supervisor had tried to bench him, shoving him behind a desk after the video went viral. But Wilson had pushed back hard. "I won't let them force me into hiding," he told his partner. Though the strain cracked through his voice, every stop he made now drew a crowd. Phones raised like weapons, recording his every move. Marcus's first big speech came on a crisp evening at the community center, a place he'd chosen with purpose just 2 blocks from where he'd been hauled away in cuffs. The parking lot overflowed with cars, forcing latecomers to line the aisles inside, their murmurs rising into a swell of anticipation. When Marcus took the stage, his presence filled the room, his voice cutting through the chatter with a clarity that demanded attention. "I'm not here as a victim," he began, his gaze steady, sweeping over the crowd. "I've walked both sides of the city's struggle, served on the council, organized for our neighborhoods, and yes, felt the sting of its injustices. But this isn't about one night or one officer. It's about a Millbrook where everyone thrives." The room erupted, applause crashing like waves. Though in the back, a handful of uniformed officers stood in silence. Not all of them stood by Wilson. Some saw in Marcus a chance to mend what had been broken for too long. Mayor Green scrambled to keep up, announcing a slate of police reform promises from his polished office. But the words rang hollow to a city already turning its eyes elsewhere, his poll numbers sinking deeper as Marcus's star rose. Storefronts began sprouting Thompson for mayor signs, even from business owners who'd once been Green's loyal base, drawn in by Marcus's call for unity over vengeance. One afternoon, as Marcus canvassed his old neighborhood, he crossed paths with Karen Wilson in the grocery store's fluorescent-lit aisle. The air thickened with the weight of the moment, but Marcus met it with grace. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, offering a polite nod, "I hope you're holding up okay." Karen froze, her hands tightening around a can of soup, her eyes flickering with a mix of defensiveness and exhaustion. "My husband is not evil," she murmured, almost to herself. Marcus studied her, his expression softening. "I believe that," he replied gently. "This isn't about good or bad people. It's about a system that's fair for all of us." Word of the exchange spread like wildfire online, adding a new layer to Marcus's growing legend. As the campaign intensified, Marcus threw himself into the details, burning the midnight oil with his team to hammer out policy oversight for the police, investments in forgotten neighborhoods, blueprints for economic renewal. His law degree wasn't just a decoration. It was a tool he wielded with precision, crafting reforms that could hit the ground running. "We've got to be ready day one," he told his staff, his voice firm with resolve. "People need results, not just words." Even the local paper's editorial board, once dubious, ran a glowing review of his platform, calling it the most grounded vision for change in years. For Wilson, the pressure only mounted. Internal affairs dug into old complaints, their files stacking up like a noose tightening around his career. Colleagues who'd once clapped him on the back now kept their distance, their support fading into whispers behind closed doors. One night, as Marcus left a rally, he found a crumpled note tucked under his windshield wiper. Scrawled in shaky handwriting, it read, "Mr. Thompson, not all of us wear the badge like Wilson. Some of us want better to. You've got my vote." It was signed by a retired sergeant, a quiet voice from within the ranks. The words fueled Marcus's fire, and at his next rally, he invited officers past and Presento join him on stage. "Reform isn't rejection," he proclaimed, his voice ringing out, "it's collaboration." "As mayor, I'll back every officer who serves with integrity and hold accountable anyone who abuses their power." By the time election day loomed, Millbrook crackled with the promise of transformation. Marcus's campaign had grown from a spark of outrage into a beacon of hope, forcing even his rivals to acknowledge the shift in the air. Justice, he'd shown them, wasn't just punishment, it was accountability, a reckoning for those who'd wielded power carelessly. For Wilson, the lesson cut deeper. The badge he'd worn with pride had become a mirror, reflecting consequences he could no longer outrun. The city stood on the brink, its future hanging on the choices of its people and the man they'd chosen to lead them. At Rosie's Diner, a cozy, bustling breakfast haven nestled in the heart of Millbrook, the air carried the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. For decades, it had been a cherished retreat for police officers seeking a warm meal and a moment of respite. Rose Martinez, the diner's spirited owner, stood behind the counter, her hands deftly wiping down the worn laminate surface as she observed her customers. With a heavy heart, in her 30 years of running this place, She had witnessed countless mornings filled with laughter and camaraderie, but now, an unsettling rift had fractured the once tight-knit group of regulars. Some officers strode in with their heads held high, proudly voicing their support for their embattled colleague, Officer Wilson, while others cast wary glances, refusing to share a tablier, even a fleeting moment of small talk with those they now saw as adversaries. The division cut deep, and Rose felt it like a personal wound. Her diner no longer a sanctuary, but a silent battlefield where loyalties clashed. Across town, Officer Wilson clung desperately to the remnants of his routine, as if the simple act of buying his morning coffee could anchor him amid the storm engulfing his life. But even that small comfort slipped through his fingers. One crisp morning, as he approached the counter at a local cafe, the young barista freckled girl barely out of her teens met his gaze with a steely resolve. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm as she said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't serve you." The refusal stung, a public rejection that left him reeling, his face burning with a mix of anger and shame as he turned away, the eyes of other patrons boring into his back. Days later, he emerged from the station to find his patrol car transformed into a canvas of outraged hundreds of sticky notes plastered across the windshield and doors, their scrawled messages screaming accountability now, and badge immunity ends here. The words blurred before his eyes as he stood frozen, the weight of the community's judgment pressing down on him. At home, the strain seeped into every corner of his life, fraying the bonds he held dear. His teenage daughter, Emily, stumbled through the front door one afternoon, her cheeks streaked with tears. She flung her backpack onto the floor and collapsed onto the couch, her voice breaking as she recounted how classmates had bombarded her with cruel memes, mocking her father digital daggers that pierced her fragile sense of belonging. Karen, Wilson's wife, bore her own quiet burden. Once a pillar of their church community, she now slipped into pews unnoticed, only to be met with stifled whispers and averted gazes. The silences grew unbearable, each one a reminder of the stigma now tethered to their family. One evening, as the dim light of a single lamp cast long shadows across their kitchen, Karen set a plate of untouched dinner aside and looked at her husband with weary eyes. "Maybe you should take some time off," she ventured softly, her tone laced with both concern and desperation. "Just a leave of absence until the election blows over." Wilson's fist crashed against the table, the sound reverberating through the room like a gunshot. "That would be admitting I'm guilty," he roared, his voice raw with defiance. "I did nothing wrong." But the tremor in his hands betrayed the doubt gnawing at his resolve. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson's campaign headquarters buzzed with a chaotic energy, a stark contrast to the turmoil consuming Wilson. The office, tucked above a modest storefront, had become a fortress of determination, though not without its own perils. Each day brought a fresh wave of death-threat-chilling letters slipped under the door, or venomous calls that left volunteers shaken. Security tightened, with burly guards now stationed at every entrance, their stern faces a constant reminder of the stakes. Beyond the headquarters, Marcus's supporters faced their own trials. A local mechanic, a vocal backer, awoke to find his shop's windows shattered, jagged glass glinting in the dawn light. A single mother who'd proudly displayed a campaign sign in her yard discovered her car tires slashed. The act a silent warning, yet Marcus refused to let fear fracture his mission. At a packed town hall meeting, the room thick with tension, he stepped onto the stage, his voice steady and resonant. "Violence and intimidation have no place in Millbrook," he declared, his words slicing through the murmurs. "Whether it comes from someone wearing a badge or someone opposing them, we must rise above it." The crowd erupted in applause, and even the skeptic's moderate voters, who'd wavered on his stance, nodded in quiet approval, drawn to his unflinching call for unity. Among those watching Marcus with growing admiration was Sarah Martinez, a seasoned officer with 20 years on the force and Rose's younger sister. Her uniform bore the creases of countless shifts, each one a testament to her dedication. After a campaign event, she lingered near the exit, her heart pounding as she approached Marcus. The words tumbled out, heavy with emotion. "I've worked with Wilson," she said, her voice low but firm. "What happened at that rally, it wasn't a one-off. It's part of a pattern." So many of us have wanted to speak out, but the culture of silence is suffocating. Her confession, raw and unguarded, became a spark, igniting a wave of testimonies that fueled an escalating internal affairs investigation. For Wilson, the fallout was relentless. His days, once spent patrolling Millbrook streets, were now consumed by tense meetings with union reps and lawyers, their briefcases stuffed with documents that mapped the unraveling of his career. The mayor's office, sensing the shifting winds, began to pull away, issuing a vague statement about reviewing departmental policies that pointedly omitted Wilson's calculated retreat that left him dangling in the void. One dreary afternoon, rain streaked down the windows of his patrol car as Wilson sat parked on a quiet street, watching a procession of protesters march by. Their signs bobbed above their heads, emblazoned with Marcus's campaign slogans: "Justice for all" and "A New Millbrook." A young boy, no older than 10, broke from the crowd and paused by Wilson's window, his small face pressed close, raindrops clinging to his lashes, and he stared with wide, unblinking eyes. There was no malice there, only a gentle curiosity tinged with something softer, perhaps pity, perhaps sorrow. The moment lingered, etching itself into Wilson's memory. As the boy turned away, rejoining the throng, Wilson felt a crack form in the armor he'd worn for years. For the first time, he let the question creep in: had he strayed so far from the ideals he'd sworn to uphold when he first pinned on his badge all those years ago? Had power, unchecked and unexamined, twisted him into the very force of oppression he'd once vowed to stand against? Back at Marcus's headquarters, the mood was electric yet grounded. Maps plastered the walls, red and blue lines crisscrossing voter districts, while volunteers hunched over phones and laptops, their voices a steady hum. Marcus leaned over a table strewn with polling data, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We're resonating," he murmured to his team, his tone tempered with caution. "But this isn't just about winning, it's about what comes after. Healing the city. That's the real fight." As October waned, Millbrook teetered on the edge of transformation. For Wilson, it meant confronting the wreckage of his unchecked authority, each revelation a mirror reflecting the cost of his choices. For Marcus, it meant shouldering the monumental task of stitching a fractured community back together, thread by fragile thread. The election loomed just weeks away, and the city held its breath, waiting to see how justice, both its pursuit and its price, would shape their future. With only 14 days until Election Day, Millbrook pulsed with a restless energy. Campaign posters clung to every storefront, their bold colors bleeding into the gray autumn light, while conversations spilled from coffee shops to park benches to factory break rooms, all circling the mayoral race that had seized national headlines. Marcus's headquarters had outgrown its cramped quarters, relocating to a sprawling office where volunteers streamed in, their faces alight with purpose. Angela, his sharp-witted campaign manager, slid a stack of papers across the desk one evening. "Latest polls have us up by 8 points, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes gleaming. "But we can't ease up. Remember how close it got last time?" Marcus nodded, his mind already drifting to the broader vision that fueled him, not just a victory, but a mandate for change. Across town, Wilson faced a reckoning of a different kind. The internal affairs investigation had concluded its initial probe, and the findings landed like a thunderclap. Captain Rodriguez summoned him to the precinct before dawn, the office still cloaked in shadows. 17 incidents, Rodriguez said, his tone clipped as he pushed a thick report across the desk. Excessive force, racial profiling, questionable arrests spanning the last 3 years. "The evidence is damning." Wilson's hands shook as he stared at the pages, the words swimming before him. "You're on paid administrative leave, effective immediately," Rodriguez continued, his gaze unwavering. "Turn in your badge and gun before you go." The news rippled through the department like wildfire. Some officers exhaled in relief, while others exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if their own records might soon face scrutiny. The police union scrambled to convene, their meeting room thick with tension as they debated their next move. Marcus's campaign, meanwhile, gained an unexpected ally. Michael Davidson, a retired police chief with a mane of silver hair and a voice that commanded respect, stepped into the spotlight alongside a cadre of former officers. At a press conference, his words carried the weight of decades on the force. "We need a leader who gets its mean, who respects law enforcement, but won't tolerate its abuses," he said, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Marcus Thompson isn't anti-police, he's anti-corruption. There's a world of difference there. The endorsement sent shockwaves through Millbrook, rattling Mayor Green's faltering campaign and bolstering Marcus's credibility among voters who'd lingered on the fence. For Wilson, isolation tightened its grip. One evening, Karen found him slumped in their living room, surrounded by scattered photos from his Academy des Images of a younger, brighter version of himself, brimming with purpose. "I wanted to be one of the good ones," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "When did it all go wrong?" Karen settled beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Maybe it's not too late," she said, her words a fragile lifeline. Maybe there's still a way to make it right, but the path forward felt shrouded in fog, each step heavier than the last. On the campaign trail, Marcus doubled down on unity. At a massive rally in the city park, the very spot where he'd once been cuffed and hauled away, he stood before thousands, the wind tugging at his coat as he spoke. "I look out at you all today, and I see the heart of Millbrook," he said, his voice rising over the cheers. "People from every walk of life, standing together for something better. We're not here to dismantle the police, we're here to rebuild them. We're not here to divide, we're here to unite." The crowd's roar was deafening, and among them stood a handful of Wilson's former allies, their Thompson for Change buttons glinting in the fading light. Then came Sarah Martinez, stepping onto the stage in her crisp uniform, her presence a quiet thunder. "I've worn this badge for 20 years, she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "Good cops want accountability. We want trust. Marcus gets that." Her words hung in the air, a bridge between two worlds. As election day loomed, the investigation into Wilson deepened, unearthing a web of troubling accounts. Officers who'd once held their tongues now spoke haltingly at first, then with urgency describing moments they'd witnessed Wilson's overreach, but felt powerless to challenge. At a press conference, the police chief faced a barrage of cameras, his jaw tight. "We're committed to transparency," he said. "One officer's actions don't define us, but they demand a response." Wilson watched from his couch, the screen's glow illuminating the ruins of his career. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he'd wrought, not just on himself, but on the community he'd sworn to protect. Marcus met the news with grace, steering his team away from gloating. "This isn't about one man's fall," he told them, his voice firm. "It's about building a system where power answers to justice, where every badge comes with a promise of fairness." As dusk fell over Millbrook, the two men stood at opposite ends of a fractured city, Wilson alone, grappling with the consequences of his hubris, and Marcus before yet another crowd, painting a future rooted in hope. The election was mere days away, and Millbrook teetered on the cusp of a new era, its people poised to decide not just a leader, but a path toward healing. When the sun rose on election day, clear and sharp, lines stretched from polling stations before dawn, a testament to a city ready to confront its past and claim its future. On a crisp morning bathed in the golden hues of dawn, Marcus Thompson stepped out of his modest home, his sister Angela by his side, her presence a quiet comfort against the weight of the day ahead. The streets of Millbrook buzzed with an energy that felt almost tangible, a hum of anticipation as citizens streamed toward polling stations. News vans lined the curbs, their cameras trained on the growing lines, capturing a scene reporters later swore surpassed even the fervor of presidential elections. Marcus, dressed simply in a navy jacket and jeans, joined the queue at his local precinct, his broad shoulders squared but his expression soft, almost reflective. He stood there, an ordinary man among neighbors, waiting patiently as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows on the pavement. When his turn came, he lingered for a heartbeat at the ballot box, his fingers brushing the paper as if it held the city's fragile hopes. "I whispered a prayer," he confided to a swarm of reporters afterward, his deep voice steady yet laced with vulnerability. "Not for a win, but for Millbrook to find its way back to itself." Across town, Officer James Wilson slipped into his precinct during a rare moment of stillness, the midday lull cloaking him in a fleeting anonymity. His once crisp uniform was traded for a faded sweater, and the lines etched into his face told a story of sleepless nights and a suspension that had stretched into weeks. A few heads turned as he passed, murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind over water, but no one dared approach. The man who had once strode with authority now carried himself with a quiet slump, his graying hair a stark contrast to the proud officer he'd been. He cast his vote quickly, avoiding eye contact, the weight of his own choices pressing down like a storm cloud he couldn't outrun. All day, the city pulsed with unprecedented life. The clerk's office scrambled, their phones ringing off the hook as precincts radioed in for extra ballots, the turnout shattering every record in Millbrook's dusty ledger. Young voters, their faces alight with a mix of defiance and pride, flooded social media with photos of "I voted" stickers plastered on jackets and laptops, their posts a digital chorus of a generation stepping into its power. At Marcus's campaign headquarters, a cramped room buzzing with nervous energy, volunteers darted between desks, their voices overlapping as they relayed updates from every district. Angela, her brow furrowed with cautious hope, leaned over a laptop, tracking the numbers as they trickled in. "Exit polls are holding strong," she murmured to Marcus, her tone a blend of disbelief and optimism. He nodded, his jaw tight, memories of past upsets flickering behind his dark eyes. "We've been burned by surprises before," he replied, his gaze fixed on the screens. Meanwhile, in Mayor Green's campaign office, the mood was a stark, somber counterpoint. Staffers moved with mechanical efficiency, stacking boxes and peeling posters from the walls, their movements heavy with resignation. The incumbent mayor, a weary man with a politician's practiced smile, sat alone in his office, to speeches folded neatly on his discone a triumphant rallying cry, the other a gracious farewell. He'd seen the numbers, felt the tide turning, and though his pride stung, he accepted the inevitable with a quiet dignity that surprised even his closest aides. As 8 p.m. struck, and the polls shuddered, Millbrook seemed to hold its collective breath, the air thick with unspoken dreams and fears. In a hotel ballroom, Marcus's supporters poured in, their campaign t-shirts a sea of red against the polished floors, homemade signs waving like flags of a new dawn. The news crews buzzed around them, setting up lights and cameras, their chatter a low hum beneath the crowd's rising excitement. Upstairs, in a private room lined with screens, Marcus stood with his inner circle, his hands clasped tightly behind his back as the first results blinked into view at 9 p.m. District by district, the numbers painted a picture no one dared believe until 10:15 p.m. When the major networks flashed their projections, Marcus Thompson, mayor-elect of Millbrook. The ballroom below exploded, a cacophony of cheers and sobs, strangers embracing as if they'd known each other forever, their voices rising in a chant of his name that echoed off the gilded walls. At 10:30 p.m., Mayor Green's call came through, his voice clipped but courteous over the line. "The people have made their choice," he said, a trace of weariness softening his words. "I hope you can mend what's broken here." Marcus listened, his chest tight with the gravity of the moment, and offered a simple "thank you" before hanging up. By 11 p.m., he stepped onto the stage, the room falling into a hush so profound it felt sacred. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but his voice rang out clear and unwavering. Tonight, Millbrook chose hope over despair, unity over fracture, progress over stagnation. He began, each word a brick laid in the foundation of a promise. "This isn't my victory, it's yours, every one of you who dared to believe we could be better." Then, with a deliberate pause, he turned his focus to the police. "To our officers who serve with honor, you're not our adversaries, but our partners. Reform isn't rejection, it's a chance to build a force that lifts us all." In a modest living room across town, James Wilson sat beside his wife, Karen, the TV casting a flickering glow over their tense faces. Her hand rested on his, a silent anchor as Marcus's words about accountability and redemption cut through the air. Tears welled in Wilson's eyes, his breathing uneven saw himself in that speech. A man who'd wielded power carelessly and now faced its reckoning. The final tally confirmed Marcus's win by a staggering 15 points, a landslide that redrew Millbrook's political map, claiming all but one district, even those long loyal to the old guard. As midnight neared, Marcus stood at the hotel window, the city sprawling beneath him like a living thing, alive with honking cars and dancing figures on the sidewalks. Angela joined him, her voice soft with nostalgia. "Remember when you told Mom you'd change the world?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. He chuckled, a sound both weary and resolute. "This is just the start. Tomorrow, we roll up our sleeves." The celebration spilled across Millbrook in waves. At First Baptist Church, Reverend Jackson's voice soared in a prayer of gratitude, the pews packed with congregants clasping hands. At Rosie's Diner, officers and civilians shared steaming mugs of coffee, their conversations tentative but tinged with possibility, a fragile bridge forming over old divides. The local paper's presses hummed, readying a bold headline: "Historic Victory, Thompson elected mayor in landslide." Alone for a moment in his temporary office, Marcus pulled out his phone. Staring at a grainy photo himself in handcuffs, Wilson's stern face beside him. Months ago at a rally that had sparked this journey. "Everything happens for a reason," he murmured, then pocketed the device and stepped back into the fray, the city's hope crackling around him like a live wire. The first month of Marcus's administration roared by in a blur of motion. His transition team burned the midnight oil, poring over policies and plotting reforms, their voices echoing through a mayor's office now stripped of its somber wood paneling and infused with a restless vitality. On a frigid January morning, Marcus sat at his desk, the weight of a thick personnel file pressing against his palms. Officer Wilson's record, 2 decades of service marred by complaints and a damning internal affairs report. Police Chief Martinez, a no-nonsense woman Marcus had tapped to spearhead the department's overhaul, leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. "It's uglier than we expected," she said, her tone clipped. Years of misconduct, swept under rugs by administrations too scared to act. Marcus rubbed his temples, the burden of justice settling like lead in his chest. "City attorney's take?" he asked. "More than enough to fire him," Martinez replied. "It's just a matter of when and how." Across town, Wilson haunted his own home, the unpaid leave stretching into a purgatory of whispers and averted gazes. Once a fixture at the precinct, he now dodged public spaces, the stares too much to bear. Karen, her face lined with worry, had picked up shifts at a local store, her hands trembling as she counted change, their future a fog neither could pierce. At the department, change unfurled new training drilled de-escalation into officers' instincts, and community meetups became mandatory, a chance to see residents as people, not cases. Officer Sarah Martinez, a young idealist who'd rallied for Marcus, led these efforts, her optimism a beacon. "Trust is growing," she told a staff meeting, her voice bright with conviction. "They're starting to see us as human again." Then came an unexpected knock. Karen Wilson, her coat clutched tight against the cold, sat across from Marcus in his office, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I know James messed up badly," she began, her voice quavering, "but these months have broken him open. He's not that man anymore." Marcus listened, his mind flashing to their fleeting campaign encounter. Her quiet strength then and now. "I hear you, Mrs. Wilson," he said gently, "but this isn't about feelings, it's about evidence, about what's right." She nodded, brushing away tears. "He wants to say sorry face to face. Would you let him?" The request jolted Marcus, but after hushed talks with his team, he agreed, setting a meeting with witnesses present. A week later, Wilson shuffled into City Hall, a diminished figure in a worn jacket, the uniform long gone. Chief Martinez and the city attorney flanked Marcus, their presence a silent reminder of the stakes. "Mayor Thompson," Wilson started, his voice a brittle thread. "I've replayed that rally 1,000 times every time I overstepped. Every time I thought power was mine to throw around. I was wrong, about you, about everything." His hands shook as he spoke, shame and clarity warring in his eyes. "I'm not begging for my badge. I just needed you to know your win. What you're doing gets opened my eyes." Silence blanketed the room. Marcus rose, crossing to the window, the city's pulse faint beyond the glass. "Thank you for coming," he said at last, turning back. "Your words matter, but the record stands. The attorney will handle the rest." Wilson dipped his head, accepting the end, but Marcus added, "Redemption's a road, not a moment. There are groups out there, ex-cops, helping mend what's broken. Look into it." Wilson left, a ghost of the man he'd been, and Martinez lingered. "That was tough," she said, her gaze steady. Marcus sighed, the lesson of justice sharp and cold. "No," he replied, "but it's what we're here for, consequences that teach, not just punish outside." Millbrook stretched into a new day, its scars still tender but its heartbeat stronger. A city learning the cost of power and the slow, hard climb to something better. As the day drew to a close, Marcus Thompson lingered in his office at City Hall, the weight of his responsibilities settling into his bones like the evening chill, creeping through the windows. He was preparing to leave, gathering his coat and scarf, when a burst of youthful laughter drifted in from outside. Curious, he stepped out into the crisp air and found a small cluster of children waiting near the steps, their faces bright with excitement. They were from the community center, a place tied to a painful chapter of his past, the very spot where he'd once been hauled away in handcuffs. "Mr. Mayor," they shouted in unison, their voices a chorus of hope. "Can we take a picture with you?" Marcus felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a quiet pride mingling with the ache of memory. He knelt down, grinning as they crowded around him, their small hands tugging at his sleeves. As the camera clicked, he caught sight of Officer Sarah Martinez strolling along her beat across the street. Her uniform gleamed faintly in the fading light, and when she waved, several of the kids waved back, shouting her name with familiarity. It was a fleeting scene, just a handful of seconds, but to Marcus, it was a glimpse of the dream he'd carried for years, a city where the divide between law enforcement and its people melted away, replaced by something stronger, something rooted in trust. The sun dipped lower, painting the streets of Millbrook in hues of amber and gold, its long shadows stretching across the pavement like promises of what could be. Change was unfolding here, not in grand leaps, but in these small, steady steps. The next morning arrived with a hum of anticipation. Marcus sat at his desk, the press release for Wilson's termination spread out before him. He traced the words with his eyes, each sentence a deliberate choice, firm yet measured, a call for reform rather than retribution. He'd spent hours refining it, wrestling with the urge to lash out, to let the bitterness of his own arrest spill onto the page. But this wasn't about settling scores, it was about building something better. At precisely 10 a.m., he stepped into the press room, the air thick with the buzz of reporters and the glare of camera flashes. The space was packed, every chair taken, every corner filled with eager faces. This was Millbrook's moment, and Marcus felt the weight of it pressing against his ribs as he approached the podium. "Today isn't about an ending," he began, his voice steady, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "It's about a beginning." He spoke of Wilson's firing not as a triumph over one man, but as a stepping stone toward a broader vision. New training programs, community oversight boards, transparent ways to voice complaints, laid out each piece of the puzzle with care. Watching the reporters scribble furiously, their pens racing to capture a day that would echo through Millbrook's history. Across town, James Wilson sat on his faded couch, the TV flickering with Marcus's image. Karen, his wife, gripped his hand tightly, her knuckles pale against his. When Marcus's voice carried through the screen, "We wish Mr. Wilson well in his future endeavors," James felt a pang of something sharp, a mix of shame and relief. Marcus's professionalism stung, but there was a glimmer of grace in it too, a hope that James might still find a way to mend what he'd broken. Later, in the mayor's office, Marcus met with his senior staff, the room humming with quiet optimism. Chief Martinez slid a folder across the table, her eyes alight with something like pride. "Complaints are down 40%, she said, tapping the page. "And community engagement, it's soaring." The numbers told a story of their own. Wilson's case had rippled through the department, a stark warning that accountability wasn't just a buzzword anymore. It was real, tangible, a line drawn in the sand. Marcus nodded, letting the news settle over him like a bomb. That afternoon, he drove to the community center, the same place where he'd once coached kids through basketball drills and late-night talks. The children greeted him with unrestrained joy, their smiles wide and unguarded. "Look, Mayor Thompson," a little girl cried, tugging him toward a fresh mural on the wall. It was a vibrant tapestry of hands brown, tan, pallot together, one clutching a police badge, another a megaphone. Marcus traced the lines with his fingers, marveling at the symbol of unity it offered. Then he saw James Wilson, standing in the doorway, no longer in his crisp uniform, but in jeans and a volunteer badge pinned to his chest. The sight stopped Marcus short, his breath catching as their eyes met. "The director thought I could help," James said, his voice low, almost tentative. "Mentor the kids, share what I've been through, both sides of it." Marcus studied him, searching for the man who'd once pressed a knee into his back during that arrest. What he saw instead was something softer, something searching. "It's a good start," Marcus replied, extending his hand. James took it, their grip firm but not forceful, and the kids nearby watched with wide, curious eyes, sensing the gravity of the moment without fully grasping it. That evening, the local news buzzed with energy as cameras rolled at the police academy. A new class of recruits stood tall in their starched uniforms, faces gleaming with nervous pride. They were the most diverse group Millbrook had ever seen, men and women of every shade, their training steeped in community outreach and de-escalation. Marcus took the stage for the commencement, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "Your badge isn't a shield to hide behind," he told them, each word deliberate. "It's a promissetto serve, to protect, to uphold justice for everyone. Wear it with honor, with humility, with wisdom." The recruits nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and awe. Afterward, Officer Martinez approached him, her smile radiant. "Community trust scores are the highest they've ever been," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "They're starting to see us as guardians again at Warriors." Back in his office, Marcus stood before the framed photos on his wall. One captured the chaos of his arrest, Wilson's hand on his shoulder. The crowd blurred in the background. The other showed him swearing his oath as mayor, hand raised, eyes fixed on a future he dared to imagine. Between them hung Millbrook's new mission: justice, unity, progress. He crossed to the window, gazing out as the city stirred to life below. Officers lingered near street vendors, swapping small talk over steaming cups. Neighbors gathered for watch meetings, their voices mingling with the clatter of evening. Kids darted through parks once shadowed by fear, their laughter rising like music. His phone buzzed. Angela, his sister. "Mom would be so proud." Marcus smiled, her words tugging at memories of their mother's quiet strength, her lessons about turning pain into purpose. What could have been a breaking point this arrested instead ignited something greater. James Wilson, once the face of a broken system, was now a thread in its repair. Outside, a patrol car eased past City Hall, the officer inside waving to a group of teens who returned the gesture without a flicker of doubt. It was a tiny thing, a wave, but it carried the weight of everything Marcus had fought for: a city where fear gave way to trust, where power answered to justice, where consequences reshaped not just laws, but lives. Millbrook had shifted, its streets and souls remade, and in that transformation lay a truth Marcus held close. True victory wasn't in punishment, but in the slow, hard-won redemption of a community's heart.